When Clara Whitmore stood before 300 of London's most powerful aristocrats, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. The Duke had just declared her unfit to be his wife. Every face in that glittering ballroom turned toward her with pity or contempt. In that moment, she had a choice: collapse under the weight of their judgment, or walk away and build something they could never touch. What happened next would shake the foundations of Victorian society itself. Will Clara rise from the ashes of public humiliation? Stay until the end to find out, and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. The rain hammered against the windows of Mrs. Pemberton's Academy for Young Ladies like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Inside the cramped instructor's quarters on the third floor, Clara Whitmore sat at her desk, her fingers stained with ink as she corrected essays by candlelight. The tallow candle flickered, casting dancing shadows across her delicate features. High cheekbones, intelligent gray eyes, and a mouth set in a line of determined composure. She was 24 years old and had been teaching at the academy for 6 years. 6 years of molding the minds of wealthy girls who would never remember her name once they married into their predetermined futures. 6 years of surviving on wages so meager that she wore the same 3 dresses in rotation, carefully mended each Sunday evening. But Clara harbored a dream that burned brighter than any candle. One day, she would open a school of her own, not for the daughters of merchants and lords, but for girls who had nothing. Girls like she had been once, before her father's death had left her mother and her destitute. Girls whose brilliance was buried beneath poverty's weight. "Miss Whitmore?" A timid knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in, Elizabeth." A young student entered, her face puffy from crying. Elizabeth Hartley was 15, the daughter of a shipping magnate, and utterly terrified of disappointing her parents. "I can't do it," Elizabeth whispered, clutching a mathematics primer to her chest. "Father says if I don't master these calculations, I'll never manage a household budget properly. But I don't understand any of it." Clara set down her pen and smiled gently. "Sit down. Show me where you're stuck." For the next hour, Clara guided Elizabeth through the problems with patience that never wavered. She had learned long ago that teaching wasn't about demonstrating superiority. It was about building bridges between confusion and clarity, fear and confidence. "You did it," Clara said softly as Elizabeth solved the final equation. "You're far more capable than you believe." Elizabeth's eyes shone with gratitude. "How do you do that, Miss Whitmore? How do you make everything seem possible?" "Because I know what it's like to believe you're not enough," Clara replied, choosing her words carefully. "And I know that belief is always a lie." After Elizabeth left, Clara returned to her desk, but the work no longer held her attention. She found herself staring out at the rain-soaked streets of London, thinking about all the girls who would never sit in a classroom like this, who would never learn that they were capable of more than servitude or factory work, or worse. She needed capital. She needed connections. She needed to somehow bridge the impossible chasm between her world and theirs. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Clara had exactly 2 hours before her afternoon lessons began, and she intended to use them wisely. She'd saved 3 shillings from her wages, enough for tea and perhaps a small cake at Ashford's, one of the respectable tea rooms where governesses and ladies' companions could sit without scandal. It was also where connections were sometimes made, where a careful word to the right person might open unexpected doors. Clara dressed in her best dress, a modest gray wool that she'd painstakingly altered to mimic the current fashion. She pinned her dark hair in a simple chignon and wrapped herself in her only shawl. As she walked through London's bustling streets, she kept her head high despite the curious glances from passers-by who could read her social station in every thread of her clothing. Ashford's tea room occupied the ground floor of a handsome brick building near Regent Street. The interior was warm and inviting, filled with the murmur of polite conversation and the delicate clink of china. Clara spotted an empty chair at a table near the window where a single gentleman sat reading a newspaper. She approached carefully. "Excuse me, sir. Might I share this table? The room appears quite full." The man lowered his newspaper, and Clara's breath caught. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair swept back from a face of almost brutal handsomeness, all sharp angles and aristocratic arrogance. His eyes were a striking shade of amber, cold and assessing as they swept over her. His clothing marked him as nobility. The perfectly tailored coat, the subtle gleam of an expensive watch chain, the signet ring that proclaimed ancient lineage. "The establishment is indeed crowded," he said, his voice like cut glass. "However, I prefer to take my tea in solitude." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. Around them, conversations faltered as other patrons turned to watch. She could feel their judgment, their amusement at her presumption. "I apologize for the intrusion," Clara said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I meant no offense." Yet offense was given nonetheless. The gentleman's gaze was withering. Perhaps in the circles where you operate, such forwardness is acceptable. Here, it is not. The dismissal was absolute. Clara turned away, her dignity wrapped around her like armor, and found a spot at the counter where unaccompanied women were permitted to sit. She ordered the cheapest tea on the menu and forced herself to drink it slowly, even as humiliation burned in her throat. She didn't know the man's name, didn't know that he was Duke Adrian Blackthorne, one of the most powerful men in England, didn't know that in 6 weeks' time her life would become inextricably tangled with his in ways neither of them could imagine. The weeks that followed fell into their familiar rhythm. Clara taught, saved, dreamed. She tutored Elizabeth Hartley and a dozen other girls, planting seeds of confidence that she hoped would bloom long after they left her classroom. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a liveried servant who looked deeply uncomfortable standing in the shabby entrance hall of Mrs. Pemberton's academy. The envelope was heavy cream paper, sealed with an elaborate wax crest. Clara's hands shook as she opened it. "Miss Clara Whitmore, your presence is requested at Blackthorne House tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for a matter of urgent employment. A carriage will be sent. Miss Helena Blackthorne." The name meant nothing to Clara. The address, Grosvenor Square, the most exclusive location in Mayfair, meant everything. This was an opportunity. Perhaps the opportunity she'd been waiting for. Mrs. Pemberton, the Academy's headmistress, was beside herself with excitement. "Blackthorne House! Oh, my dear Miss Whitmore, do you understand what this means? The Blackthornes are one of the oldest families in England. If you please them, if you secure a position there, it could change everything for you." Clara allowed herself a small smile. "I'll do my best." The next afternoon, she dressed with painstaking care in her gray wool dress. The carriage that arrived was magnificent, all polished ebony and brass fittings, with the Blackthorne crest emblazoned on the door. The driver handed her in as though she were a lady, and Clara settled against the velvet seats, her heart pounding. The journey through London's streets was short. As they turned onto Grosvenor Square, Clara pressed her face to the window, marveling at the enormous townhouses that surrounded the private park. Blackthorne House rose before them like a palace. 4 stories of pristine white stone, with dozens of windows glittering in the afternoon sun. A butler greeted her at the door with cool professionalism. "Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Blackthorne is expecting you in the drawing room." Clara followed him through halls that seemed to drip with wealth. Marble floors, soaring ceilings painted with classical scenes, artwork that belonged in museums. Every step reminded her how far she'd come from the tiny cottage where she'd been born. The drawing room was a masterpiece of elegant design. Mrs. Helena Blackthorne sat on a settee upholstered in ivory silk, her silver hair arranged in perfect curls, her posture regal. She was perhaps 60, with the kind of beauty that age refined rather than diminished. "Miss Whitmore," she said, her voice cultured and assessing. "Please, sit." Clara perched on the edge of a chair, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Mrs. Blackthorne studied her in silence for a long moment. "You come highly recommended as a governess. Mrs. Pemberton speaks of your intelligence and discretion. I have need of someone to tutor my grandnephew, Thomas. He is 8 years old and has proven challenging for previous instructors." "I would be honored to work with him," Clara replied carefully. "The position comes with residence in this house," Mrs. Blackthorne continued. "Your own rooms, meals provided, and a salary of £60 per year, considerably more than you currently earn, I believe." £60. Clara's current salary was 18. The difference was staggering. "However," Mrs. Blackthorne said, her pale eyes sharpening, "there is another dimension to this arrangement that I must explain." Clara waited, suddenly wary. "My nephew, Thomas's guardian, is the Duke of Blackthorn. He is 31 years old and unmarried. This situation has become problematic. The family requires him to marry and produce an heir. He has resisted all conventional matches, finding the young ladies of our circle to be frivolous and unsuitable. Clara's stomach began to sink as she understood where this was going. We believe, Mrs. Blackthorn continued, her tone businesslike, that what the Duke requires is not a grand passion or a society belle, but a sensible, educated woman of good character, someone who understands her place and can manage a household efficiently. Someone practical. You want me to marry him? Clara said quietly. Eventually, yes. First, you would enter the household as Thomas's governess. You would demonstrate your capabilities. You would become familiar with our ways. And then, if all parties are agreeable, an arrangement would be formalized. Clara felt as though the beautiful room was closing in on her. Does the Duke know about this plan? He has given his consent to the broad outlines. He understands the necessity of marriage and has agreed to consider candidates we present to him. You would be one such candidate. I see. Clara's mind raced. This was grotesque, being offered up like a commodity, evaluated for her adequacy as breeding stock for an ancient bloodline. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. But £60 a year, a position in one of England's great houses. And if she married the Duke, however cold-bloodedly the arrangement might be made, she would have access to resources beyond imagination. She could fund her school, could change hundreds of lives. Was it worth sacrificing her own dreams of love, of choosing her own path? I need time to consider, Clara said. Mrs. Blackthorn's expression hardened slightly. You have until tomorrow evening. After that, we will pursue other candidates. Clara stood, her legs unsteady. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Blackthorn. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She paced her tiny room, wrestling with the decision before her. She thought of all the girls she'd taught, all the girls she'd never reach if she remained a poorly paid governess for the rest of her life. She thought of the school she dreamed of building, and she thought of the cold-eyed man in the tea room who had dismissed her so thoroughly. Was that the Duke? Would she be binding herself to someone who saw her as nothing more than an adequate solution to an inconvenient problem? By dawn, she had her answer. She would accept, she would play their game, and somehow she would turn this gilded cage into a doorway to freedom. Clara moved into Blackthorn House 3 days later, her few possessions fitting easily into a single trunk. The room they gave her was larger than any space she'd ever occupied, a bedchamber with an attached sitting room, decorated in soft blues and creams, with a view of the square below. Thomas proved to be exactly as challenging as advertised. He was a bright boy with wild auburn curls and a talent for testing boundaries. His parents had died in a carriage accident 2 years earlier, leaving him in the Duke's care, and his grief manifested as rebellion. On Clara's first morning, Thomas refused to come to the schoolroom. She found him in the library, building an elaborate fortress out of priceless first editions. Those books belong on the shelves, Thomas, she said calmly. I don't have to listen to you. You're just another governess. The last 3 all quit. Clara sat down on the floor beside his fort, carefully adjusting a volume that was about to topple. Did they quit because you were difficult, or because they didn't understand you? Thomas blinked, surprised. Both, I suppose. I won't quit, Clara said, so you might as well tell me what you're building here. Slowly, hesitantly, Thomas began to explain his fortress design. Clara listened, asked questions, and gradually steered the conversation toward mathematics, how to calculate the angles needed for stability, how many books would be required for different heights. By the end of the morning, Thomas was solving geometry problems without realizing he was doing schoolwork. You're sneaky, he told her as they ate lunch together in the schoolroom. I prefer to think of it as creative, Clara replied with a small smile. Over the following weeks, Clara established a routine with Thomas that actually worked. They studied in the mornings, took walks in Hyde Park in the afternoons, and read together before bed. The boy began to trust her, to open up about his grief and his fears. But during all this time, Clara barely saw the Duke. He was a ghost in his own house, leaving early for Parliament or his clubs, returning late after she'd retired to her rooms. She caught only glimpses, A tall figure in the hallway, a voice echoing from the study, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in a room he'd just vacated. Until one evening when everything changed. Clara was reading in the library. She'd been given permission to use it freely when the door opened and he walked in. She recognized him immediately. The same cold amber eyes, the same aristocratic features, the same air of absolute authority. The man from the tea room, the Duke of Blackthorn. He stopped short when he saw her, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Recognition? Surprise? It was gone too quickly to read. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice as cutting as she remembered. "I trust you are settling in adequately." Clara rose and curtsied, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, Your Grace, thank you." "And Thomas?" "He's a remarkable boy. Quite brilliant, actually. He simply needs guidance that engages his mind rather than trying to force it into submission." The Duke's eyebrow rose slightly. "You have opinions on education, then?" "I have experience with it." "Indeed." He crossed to the decanter on the side table and poured himself a measure of whiskey. "My aunt informs me that you are aware of the broader purpose of your position here." Heat crept up Clara's neck, but she kept her voice steady. "I am." "And you find the arrangement acceptable?" "I find it practical," Clara replied, choosing her words with care. "As I understand you do as well." Something flashed in those amber eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or grudging respect. "Practical. Yes. That's an apt description." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more, eager, more obviously ambitious. Most women would be fawning by now, trying to secure my favor." "I am not most women, Your Grace." "No," he said softly. "You are not." For a long moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken tensions. Then the Duke set down his glass with a sharp click. "We will announce the engagement at the midsummer ball," he said abruptly. 6 weeks from now. That should give you time to acquire a suitable wardrobe and learn the necessary social graces. My aunt will guide you." "Of course, Your Grace." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Whitmore, that day at Ashford's tea room. I did not realize who you were. Would it have made a difference if you had?" The Duke's jaw tightened. "I suppose we'll never know." After he left, Clara sank back into her chair, her heart pounding. So he had remembered. And he had still chosen to proceed with this calculated marriage, this arrangement where she was nothing more than an adequate solution to his family's demands. She would go through with it. She would wear the beautiful dresses, learn the intricate dances, smile at the aristocrats who would judge her every move. She would become the Duchess of Blackthorn. And then, somehow, she would use that power to build something that mattered. The transformation began the next morning. Mrs. Blackthorn summoned Clara to her private sitting room, where a severe-looking woman in black waited with a measuring tape and a critical eye. "This is Madame Rousseau," Mrs. Blackthorn explained. "She will be creating your wardrobe, sparing no expense, naturally." For the next 3 hours, Clara stood while Madame Rousseau measured every inch of her body, muttering in French about proportions and fabric choices. Swatches of silk, satin, and velvet were draped across Clara's shoulders as Mrs. Blackthorn issued commands. "She needs a complete wardrobe. Morning dresses, afternoon dresses, evening gowns, walking costumes, riding habits, though I don't suppose she rides." "No," Clara admitted quietly. "Then we'll arrange lessons. A duchess must be able to ride. What about dancing?" "I learned the basics at the academy where I taught." Mrs. Blackthorn's mouth thinned. "Basics will not suffice. I'll engage a dancing master." And so Clara's days split into 2 distinct halves. Mornings belonged to Thomas, lessons and laughter and the genuine connection she'd built with the boy. But afternoons and evenings became a grueling education in aristocratic performance. The dancing master, Monsieur Beaumont, was a tiny man with a booming voice who shouted corrections as Clara learned the intricate steps of waltzes, quadrilles, and country dances. Her feet ached constantly. A riding instructor took her to Hyde Park at dawn, teaching her to sit properly on a side saddle, to control a horse with subtle shifts of weight and gentle commands. She fell twice before she got the hang of it. Mrs. Blackthorn herself oversaw lessons in deportment, conversation, and the Byzantine rules of social precedence. Clara learned which fork to use for each course, how to curtsy to royalty versus mere nobility, how to make conversation without revealing her own opinions. "You must understand," Mrs. Blackthorne said one afternoon as Clara practiced pouring tea with exact precision, "that as a duchess, you will be watched constantly. Every word, every gesture will be analyzed for signs of your origins. You must give them nothing to criticize." "In other words," Clara replied quietly, "I must pretend to be someone I'm not." "You must become someone you were not," Mrs. Blackthorne corrected sharply. "There is a difference." The gowns began to arrive, confections of silk and lace that transformed Clara's appearance completely. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The simple governess had vanished, replaced by someone who could almost pass for one of them. Almost. She still caught the servants whispering in corners, saw the speculation in their eyes. The Duke's household staff knew exactly what was happening. Their master was marrying the governess as a practical expedient, nothing more. During all this preparation, Clara saw the Duke only occasionally. He observed her progress from a distance, his expression unreadable. Once, she caught him watching her dance at a practice session Mrs. Blackthorne had arranged, his amber eyes intense and assessing. Their eyes met across the room, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not attraction exactly, but awareness. This cold, controlled man would be her husband, would share her name, if not her heart. She looked away first, focusing on the steps, on survival. But late at night, alone in her beautiful room, Clara sometimes allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd agreed to. She was selling herself in a way, trading her freedom, her chance at love, for security, and the resources to achieve her dreams. Was it worth it? She didn't know anymore. 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The night before the midsummer ball, Clara stood in her room while Madame Rousseau made final adjustments to the gown she would wear, a masterpiece of ivory silk embroidered with seed pearls that caught the light like captured stars. "You look beautiful, Miss Clara," whispered Annie, the young maid who'd been assigned to her. "I look like someone else entirely," Clara replied. There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Blackthorne entered, carrying a velvet box. "These were the late duchesses," she said, opening the box to reveal a stunning set of diamonds and sapphires, necklace, earrings, and bracelet. "They will be yours after the wedding. Tomorrow night, you will wear them for the announcement." Clara stared at the jewels, which probably cost more than her father had earned in his entire life. "They're magnificent. They're the Blackthorne sapphires. Every duchess has worn them for 300 years, Mrs. Blackthorne's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I know this is not the romantic match you might have dreamed of as a girl, Clara, but you have conducted yourself with grace and intelligence. The Duke chose well, whether he fully realizes it yet or not." After she left, Clara held the sapphires up to the light, watching them sparkle. Tomorrow night, everything would change. Tomorrow night, she would step into the ballroom as the future Duchess of Blackthorne, and there would be no going back. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm. She had survived poverty, loss, and obscurity. She would survive this too. And somehow, some way, she would turn this gilded cage into something more. The midsummer ball at Blackthorne House was the social event of the season. 300 guests filled the ballroom, every important family in London, all dressed in their finest, all eager to see the Duke finally announce his choice of bride. Clara descended the grand staircase on Mrs. Blackthorne's arm, the Blackthorne sapphires blazing at her throat. Her gown rustled with each step, and she could feel hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. The whispers had already started. They knew who she was, or who she had been. A governess, a nobody, a practical choice. The Duke waited at the bottom of the stairs in formal evening dress, looking every inch the aristocrat he'd been born to be. When Clara reached him, he offered his arm with cool courtesy. "You look well, Miss Whitmore." "Thank you, Your Grace." He led her into the ballroom, and the orchestra began to play. They would open the dancing with a waltz, and then the Duke would make his announcement. As they took their positions on the floor, Clara noticed a woman standing near the orchestra, tall, blonde, breathtakingly beautiful, dressed in emerald silk. The woman was watching the Duke with an expression of barely concealed longing. "Who is that?" Clara asked quietly as the music began. The Duke's arm tensed beneath her hand. Lady Seraphina Vale. He offered no further explanation, but Clara didn't need one. The way he looked at Lady Seraphina, the way his cold expression softened, the way warmth finally entered his amber eyes, told her everything she needed to know. This was the woman he wanted. This was the woman he would have chosen, if duty hadn't demanded otherwise. And Clara was merely the practical substitute. They waltzed in silence, perfectly in step, performing for an audience that watched their every move. Clara had learned well. Her posture was impeccable, her steps flawless. To the observers, they must have looked like a well-matched couple. Only Clara could feel the distance between them, wider than any ballroom. When the waltz ended, the Duke led her to the center of the floor. He raised his hand for silence, and gradually the conversations died away. This was it, the moment of transformation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Duke began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the ballroom. "Thank you for joining us tonight. I have gathered you here to make an important announcement regarding—" He stopped. Clara felt his arm stiffen beneath her hand, felt the sudden tension radiating from him like heat from a fire. "Regarding the future of the Blackthorn line." The crowd leaned forward, anticipating. The Duke turned to look at Clara, and she saw something terrible in his eyes. Regret, resolution, cruelty born of his own trapped circumstances. "I have given considerable thought to the question of marriage," he continued, his voice like ice. "I have sought a partner who would understand the demands of this position, who would manage my household efficiently, who would be adequate to the task." Adequate. That word again, delivered like a slap. Clara's throat tightened, but she kept her expression serene. "However," the Duke said, and the ballroom seemed to hold its breath, "I have come to realize that adequacy is not enough. A duchess must be more than merely suitable. She must be born to this world, shaped by it, fluent in its language from birth." No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. "Miss Whitmore is an admirable woman," the Duke continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "Intelligent, dignified, capable, but she is not, and can never truly be, one of us. It would be unfair to her, and to the legacy of this house, to proceed with an arrangement built on mere practicality rather than genuine fitness for the role." The whispers erupted like thunder. Clara stood frozen, her face burning, her hands ice cold. Around her, 300 aristocrats stared with pity or satisfaction or cruel amusement. She saw Mrs. Blackthorn's shocked face, saw Lady Seraphina's expression of triumph. The Duke had just humiliated her before all of London. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore," he said, though his tone suggested nothing of the sort. "This was a mistake." For one terrible moment, Clara thought her legs would give out, thought she would crumple there on the ballroom floor and give them the spectacle they clearly wanted. Then something fierce and cold crystallized in her chest. She would not break, not here, not for them. Clara turned to face the Duke, meeting his amber eyes with a gaze of pure steel. "You are correct, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This was indeed a mistake, but not for the reasons you state." She pulled off the Blackthorn sapphires, necklace, earrings, bracelet, and pressed them into his hands. "I wish you joy in finding a bride who is born to be your equal. Pray excuse me." With her head high and her spine straight, Clara walked through the silent crowd toward the ballroom doors. Every step was agony. Every breath felt like drawing in shards of glass. But she did not run, did not stumble. She walked. She kept walking through the marble halls, past gaping servants, up the grand staircase to her room. She threw her few personal possessions into the same trunk she'd brought 6 weeks earlier. Thomas found her there, his face streaked with tears. "You're leaving," he said. "You're leaving like all the others." Clara knelt before him, taking his small hands in hers. "Thomas, listen to me. What happened tonight has nothing to do with you. You are brilliant and brave and worthy of love. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than that." "Will I see you again?" Clara's eyes burned. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so." She hugged him fiercely, then stood and picked up her trunk. No one stopped her as she walked out of Blackthorn House into the London night. The gates closed behind her with a final clang. Clara stood on the pavement in her ruined ball gown, her trunk at her feet, with nowhere to go and nothing left but her pride. The Duke had destroyed her reputation, had made her the talk of London, the presumptuous governess who had dared to reach above her station and been cast down for it. No respectable household would hire her now. No academy would take her back. She had gambled everything on a promise that turned out to be ash. But as Clara looked up at the indifferent stars, she felt something unexpected rising in her chest. Not despair, but rage. Clear, cold, purposeful rage. They thought they had broken her. They had no idea what they'd actually done. They had set her free. Clara spent her first night of freedom on a bench in Russell Square, her trunk serving as a pillow, her ruined ball gown gathering dew. She didn't sleep. Instead, she watched the sky lighten from black to gray to pale gold, listening to London wake around her, milk carts rattling over cobblestones, chimney sweeps calling their trade, the distant clang of church bells marking the hours. By dawn, she had made 3 decisions. First, she would not return to Mrs. Pemberton's academy. That door was closed forever. No headmistress would risk her reputation by employing a governess who'd been publicly rejected by a duke. Second, she would not leave London. Running would accomplish nothing except confirm what society already believed, that she was a fortune hunter who'd been exposed and shamed. Third, she would survive. However difficult, however degrading, she would find a way. She rose stiffly from the bench, smoothed her ruined gown as best she could, and began walking. Her immediate need was shelter. Her savings amounted to 7 shillings and 4 pence, enough for perhaps 2 nights in a respectable boarding house, if such a place would even admit her. The streets filled with morning traffic as Clara made her way toward Bloomsbury, where she knew of lodging houses that catered to women of limited means. Her feet ached in the delicate slippers Madame Rousseau had crafted for dancing, not walking. Passers-by stared at the incongruous sight she presented, a woman in evening dress carrying a battered trunk through the working-class morning. At the 3rd boarding house she tried, the landlady, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Doyle, looked her up and down with undisguised suspicion. "I don't run that kind of establishment," Mrs. Doyle said flatly. Clara's cheeks burned. I was a governess. I left my previous position unexpectedly and need temporary accommodation while I seek new employment." "In a ball gown?" "It's a long story." Mrs. Doyle's eyes narrowed, but something in Clara's expression must have convinced her. 2 shillings a night paid in advance, breakfast included. No visitors, no noise, no trouble. "Thank you," Clara said quietly. The room was barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking an alley. But it was clean and private, and after the emotional devastation of the previous night, privacy was what Clara needed most. She changed out of the ball gown with trembling fingers, folding the silk carefully despite everything it represented. She couldn't afford to waste anything, even memories of humiliation. The fabric alone was worth several pounds if she could find a buyer. Dressed in her old gray wool, wrinkled from being packed but blessedly anonymous, Clara sat on the bed and forced herself to think clearly. She needed employment. But what kind? Her teaching credentials were excellent, but the scandal would have spread through London's social networks like wildfire. Every household that employed governesses would have heard by now. Clara Whitmore, the presumptuous nobody who tried to trap the Duke of Blackthorn into marriage and been exposed at the midsummer ball. The story would grow with each retelling, becoming more salacious, more damning. She could try to find work outside London, but that would require travel funds she didn't possess. And even in the provinces, scandal had a way of following. No. She would have to find work that didn't depend on references from aristocratic families, work that existed in the shadows of respectable society. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety, but Clara had learned long ago that survival required flexibility. She would do what she must. Over the next 3 days, Clara visited every employment agency in Bloomsbury and Clerkenwell. She offered her skills as a translator. She was fluent in French and adequate in Latin and Greek. She applied to work as a clerk in bookshops, as a companion to elderly ladies, even as a seamstress despite her limited sewing abilities. Every door closed in her face. "We require references," they said, or "the position has just been filled," or most cutting of all, "we don't employ women of questionable character." By the 4th morning, Clara had 3 shillings left. Mrs. Doyle had made it clear that payment was required daily, without exception. Clara sold the ball gown to a second-hand dealer in Covent Garden for 30 shillings, a fraction of its worth, but the dealer knew desperation when he saw it. She kept her 2 other dresses, her few books, and her pride. With her finances temporarily stabilized, Clara expanded her search. She walked through neighborhoods she'd previously avoided, investigating opportunities that respectable women weren't supposed to consider. It was in one such neighborhood, a narrow street near the docks where the air smelled of fish and coal smoke, that she saw the notice posted in a grimy window. Translator needed must read Latin, Greek, French. Medical texts. Inquire within. The building was a nondescript brick structure wedged between a chandler's shop and a public house. Clara hesitated only a moment before pushing open the door. Inside, she found herself in a cramped office filled with stacks of books and papers. A man sat at a desk, so absorbed in his reading that he didn't immediately notice her entrance. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and ink stains on his fingers. His clothing marked him as educated but not wealthy, a scholar's threadbare coat, worn boots. When he finally looked up, Clara was struck by the intensity of his gray eyes. "Can I help you?" His accent was educated but not aristocratic. Middle class, professional. "I'm here about the translator position." His eyebrows rose. "You read Latin and Greek?" "Fluently, and French, German, and some Italian." "That's impressive." He stood, gesturing to a chair piled with books. "Please sit. I'm Dr. Elias Rowan. I apologize for the chaos. I'm in the process of establishing a medical clinic and research facility." Clara moved the books carefully and sat. "What kind of translations do you need?" "I'm studying new surgical techniques being developed on the continent," Elias explained, his enthusiasm evident. "French and German medical journals, Italian anatomical texts, Greek and Roman medical treatises. Most of my colleagues dismiss anything not written in English, but I believe we're missing crucial advances by limiting ourselves to one language." "That seems short-sighted," Clara agreed. "It's worse than short-sighted. It's killing people." Elias leaned forward, his expression passionate. "There's a physician in Vienna who's proven that washing hands between patients reduces mortality in maternity wards by nearly 90%. 90%! But because most English doctors can't read German, or won't bother to, women continue to die from childbed fever that could easily be prevented." Clara found herself drawn into his intensity. Here was someone who cared about something beyond social position and propriety, someone fighting for knowledge that could save lives. "I can help with that," she said quietly. Elias studied her for a long moment. "I should be honest with you, Miss Whitmore, Clara Whitmore." Something flickered across his face. Recognition. He'd heard the name. Of course he had. Even in this rough neighborhood, scandal penetrated. "Miss Whitmore," he continued carefully, "this position isn't what most women would consider respectable. The clinic I'm building will serve the poor, dock workers, factory laborers, prostitutes. We'll be working in areas no lady should enter. The medical establishment considers me a dangerous radical, and anyone associated with me will share that stigma." "I've already lost my respectability," Clara said bluntly. "I might as well lose it doing something worthwhile." A slow smile spread across Elias's face. "In that case, when can you start?" They settled on terms quickly. 10 shillings a week to begin, with the possibility of more as funds allowed. The work would involve translating medical texts corresponding with foreign physicians, and eventually, if Clara proved capable, assisting with the administrative side of the clinic. It wasn't teaching, it wasn't building a school for girls, but it was purpose, and purpose was what Clara desperately needed. She began the next morning. Elias's office was actually the ground floor of a building he'd purchased with money borrowed from a sympathetic banker. The upper floors were being converted into a small hospital, just 20 beds initially, but designed to expand. "The concept is revolutionary," Elias explained as he showed Clara around the construction site. "Most hospitals are charity institutions that treat the poor like cattle, or they're expensive private facilities only the wealthy can access. I want to create something different, a place where anyone can receive quality medical care regardless of their ability to pay, and where doctors and nurses can be properly trained." Where will the funding come from? Clara asked practically. That's the challenge. Wealthy patients will pay standard fees, which will subsidize care for those who can't afford it. I'm also applying for grants from reform-minded philanthropists, and I'm hoping to attract doctors who care more about advancing medicine than getting rich. It was an ambitious dream, perhaps impossibly so. But Clara understood the power of impossible dreams. They were what kept you moving when logic said to surrender. Over the following weeks, Clara immersed herself in the work. She translated dense medical texts from French and German, converting technical terminology into clear English. She read about new theories of disease transmission, innovative surgical procedures, and radical ideas about treating mental illness with compassion rather than chains. The material was challenging, often disturbing, but fascinating. Claire discovered she had an aptitude for medical language, for understanding complex anatomical descriptions and chemical processes. More than that, she discovered she had a stomach for it. The detailed descriptions of surgeries and dissections that made other translators squeamish left her curious and engaged. You should have been a physician, Elias told her one afternoon as she delivered a particularly complex translation of a German paper on cardiac anatomy. Clara laughed bitterly. Women aren't allowed to practice medicine in England. Not yet. But that will change. It must change. Elias leaned back in his chair, studying her. You're wasted on translation work, Clara. You have the mind for medicine itself. The mind, perhaps, but not the opportunity. What if I could create the opportunity? Clara looked up sharply. What do you mean? My hospital, when it's complete, will need nurses. Real nurses, trained in modern techniques, not just women who clean bedpans. What if we established a formal nursing school, taught women anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, gave them real medical knowledge? The medical establishment would never allow it. The medical establishment doesn't control my hospital, Elias said with fierce satisfaction. I do, and I'll run it as I see fit. For the first time since the midsummer ball, Clara felt something like hope stirring in her chest. This wasn't her dream of a school for poor girls, but it was related. It was education. It was giving women opportunities they'd never had before. I'd like to be part of that, she said quietly. Then you will be. But Clara's fragile new beginning was about to face its first real test. The rumors started circulating in the third week of her employment. Whispers in the boarding house, sidelong glances from shopkeepers, anonymous notes slipped under her door. Shameless woman. Jezebel, how dare you show your face in decent society? Clara ignored them, focusing on her work. But the harassment escalated. Someone threw a stone through Mrs. Doyle's window with a note attached. You harbor a whore. Mrs. Doyle summoned Clara to her parlor that evening, her face grim. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, but I can't have this kind of trouble. You'll need to find other accommodation. Please, Clara said, hating the pleading note in her voice. I've done nothing wrong. I'm employed. I pay my rent on time. It's not about what you've done. It's about what people think you've done. I have a business to protect. Clara packed her trunk for the second time in a month. This time, finding new lodging proved nearly impossible. Every boarding house either refused her outright or quoted prices far beyond her means. She ended up in a grim tenement in Whitechapel, sharing a single room with 3 factory workers who came and went at all hours. The walls were damp, the smell of sewage permeated everything, and rats skittered across the floor at night. But it was shelter, and shelter was not something Clara could afford to be particular about. The harassment didn't stop with her eviction. It followed her to work. One morning, Clara arrived at the clinic to find Harlot painted across the door in red letters. Elias was already there, scrubbing at the paint with grim determination. I'm so sorry, Clara said, her voice thick with shame. This is because of me. This is because of small-minded people who have nothing better to do than persecute a woman for daring to exist, Elias replied firmly. Don't apologize for their cruelty. But the incidents continued. Anonymous letters arrived at the clinic threatening Elias's funding if he continued to employ that Whitmore woman. Potential donors withdrew their support. The medical establishment, already suspicious of Elias's radical ideas, seized on Clara's presence as evidence of his unsuitability. You should dismiss me, Clara told him one evening as they worked late, translating a crucial French paper on antiseptic techniques. I'm destroying everything you're trying to build. Elias set down his pen and looked at her directly. Clara, I'm going to tell you something that may sound presumptuous. I don't care about your scandal. I don't care that you were engaged to a duke and it ended badly. I care that you're brilliant, dedicated, and capable. I care that you understand the importance of this work. Everything else is noise. Noise that's preventing you from achieving your goals. Then we'll achieve them despite the noise, together. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself since that terrible night. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Because I recognize someone who's been judged unfairly, Elias said quietly. My father was a country doctor who treated the poor for free. The medical establishment despised him for it, said he was lowering the profession's standards. When he died, they didn't even send condolences to my mother. I learned young that sometimes doing the right thing makes you society's enemy. And you chose to do it anyway, just as you're choosing to keep going despite everything they're throwing at you. Elias smiled slightly. We're a good match, Miss Whitmore. Both too stubborn to know when we're beaten. Over the following months, Clara and Elias built something extraordinary together. The hospital slowly took shape. 20 beds became reality, arranged in a bright ward with large windows that Elias insisted on despite the extra cost. Fresh air and sunlight, he argued, were as important as medicine. They hired 2 young physicians who shared Elias's progressive ideals, and 3 nurses willing to learn new techniques. Clara translated training materials from German and French, creating the foundation for what would become their nursing curriculum. And slowly, cautiously, patients began to arrive. The first was a dock worker with a badly infected hand. Elias treated him using the antiseptic techniques Clara had translated from the German papers, washing the wound with carbolic acid solution, applying clean bandages, insisting that everyone who touched the patient first wash their hands. The other doctors thought he was mad, but the infection cleared and the man kept his hand. Word spread through the working-class neighborhoods. There was a doctor in Whitechapel who actually listened to poor people, who treated them with dignity, who used strange new methods that seemed to work. Clara found her role expanding beyond translation. She began managing the hospital's administrative work, patient records, supply orders, financial accounts. She assisted in developing treatment protocols, drawing on her translations of the latest medical literature. She also began teaching. The nurses they'd hired were eager to learn, but had no formal medical education. Clara started holding informal lessons in the evenings, teaching them anatomy and physiology, explaining disease processes, training them to recognize symptoms that required a physician's immediate attention. You're a natural teacher, Elias observed one evening, watching Clara guide a young nurse through the circulatory system using a detailed anatomical chart. It's what I was meant to do, Clara replied simply. But even as the hospital grew, the social ostracism continued to shadow Clara's life. She was allowed to work, barely, but not to exist in any other capacity. Shopkeepers served her with barely concealed contempt. Other women crossed the street to avoid her. Children threw mud at her dress and ran away laughing. The loneliness was crushing. Clara had no friends, no social life beyond her work. Her only regular human contact was with Elias, the hospital staff, and patients too desperate to care about her ruined reputation. Then, 6 months after the midsummer ball, everything changed again. Clara was working late one evening, translating a particularly complex French paper on surgical anesthesia, when Elias burst into her office. "We have a problem," he said, his face pale. "Lord Ashford's daughter. She's hemorrhaging after childbirth. The family's regular physician has given up, says there's nothing more he can do. But I think I can save her if I use the techniques in that Vienna paper you translated last month." Clara's mind raced. The one about manual removal of retained placental fragments? Yes, it's radical, but it works. The problem is she's a lady, and you're a doctor who works in Whitechapel, Clara finished. The family will never trust you. They're desperate. The mother's dying, Clara. She has hours, maybe less. Elias grabbed her shoulders, his gray eyes intense. I need you to come with me. You speak their language. You know their world. You can convince them to let me try. I'm the last person they'll listen to. I'm the governess who tried to trap a duke, remember? You're also the woman who saved a dozen lives in the past 6 months through your translations and your work. That's who I need them to see." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to hide in her little office and avoid the condemnation she knew awaited. But a woman was dying, and Clara had the knowledge that might save her. She stood. "Let's go." Lord Ashford's townhouse in Belgravia was ablaze with lights, but the atmosphere inside was one of barely controlled panic. Servants rushed through halls, their faces drawn. From somewhere upstairs came the sound of muffled weeping. The butler tried to turn Elias and Clara away at the door, but Elias pushed past him with uncharacteristic force. "I'm Dr. Rowan. I can help Lady Catherine. Where is she?" "The family physician is with her." "The family physician has given up." "I haven't. Take me to her now, or her death will be on your conscience." The butler, rattled by Elias's intensity, led them upstairs. Lord Ashford met them in the hallway outside his daughter's room, a gray-haired man with devastation written on every line of his face. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Dr. Elias Rowan. I specialize in obstetric complications. I have experience with cases like your daughter's." "Doctor, Morrison is the finest physician in London." "Dr. Morrison is using outdated techniques," Elias said bluntly. "I'm using methods developed in Vienna that have an 80% success rate in similar cases. Your daughter is dying. Let me try to save her." Lord Ashford's gaze shifted to Clara, and recognition dawned in his eyes. "You. I know you. You're the Whitmore woman. The one who—" "Yes," Clara said quietly. "I'm that woman. And I'm also the person who translated the medical research that might save your daughter's life. Please, Lord Ashford, let Dr. Rowan try." For a long moment, the man wavered. Clara could see the conflict in his face, aristocratic prejudice warring with a father's desperate love. Finally, he stepped aside. "If she dies, I'll have you both arrested for murder." "If she dies," Elias replied grimly, "I'll deserve it." What followed was the longest night of Clara's life. Elias worked with focused intensity, his hands steady despite the blood and the family's regular physician's outraged protests. Clara assisted, handing him instruments, monitoring Lady Catherine's pulse, speaking calmly to the terrified young woman. The procedure Elias performed was delicate and dangerous, manually extracting the fragments of placenta that were causing the hemorrhage, then using ergot to contract the uterus and stop the bleeding. Clara had read about the technique in the Vienna paper. Reading about it and watching it performed on a real woman were entirely different experiences. Lady Catherine screamed, blood soaked the sheets. The regular physician declared that Elias was killing her and stormed from the room, but slowly, impossibly, the bleeding slowed, then stopped. Lady Catherine's pulse steadied. Color returned to her ashen face. She would live. Elias stepped back from the bed, his coat splattered with blood, his hands trembling now that the crisis had passed. "She needs rest, lots of fluids. Watch for signs of fever. If her temperature rises, send for me immediately, but she should recover fully." Lord Ashford, who'd watched the entire procedure from the doorway, approached slowly. His eyes were wet with tears. "You saved her," he said hoarsely. "You saved my daughter when Morrison said it was hopeless." "The knowledge came from Vienna," Elias replied. "Miss Whitmore translated it. Without her work, I wouldn't have known what to do." Lord Ashford turned to Clara. "I owe you an apology, Miss Whitmore. I judged you based on gossip, but gossip didn't save Catherine's life. Knowledge did. Your knowledge." Clara felt something crack open in her chest, a wound she'd been carrying since the midsummer ball. "Thank you," she whispered. The story spread through London even faster than the original scandal had. The notorious Clara Whitmore had helped save Lord Ashford's daughter. The radical Dr. Rowan had performed a medical miracle using techniques from the continent. Together, they'd proven that modern medical science could triumph where traditional methods failed. It didn't erase Clara's ruined reputation, but it complicated it, made it harder to dismiss her as merely a failed social climber. Donations to the hospital increased. More patients arrived, willing to try these strange new treatments. 3 additional physicians applied to join the staff, intrigued by Elias's methods, and Clara received a letter. It came on expensive paper, sealed with a familiar crest. Her hands shook as she opened it. Miss Whitmore, I have heard of your recent work with Dr. Rowan. I have also heard that you intend to establish a nursing school, the first of its kind in England. If this is true, I would like to discuss providing financial support for such an endeavor. Whatever happened between us in the past, I recognize that you have talents worth cultivating. Respectfully, Adrian Blackthorne. Clara stared at the letter for a long time. The Duke was offering her money, offering to be her patron. 6 months ago, she would have wept with gratitude. Now she felt only cold clarity. He'd had his chance to support her, to see her value. He'd chosen public humiliation instead. His change of heart came too late, and from the wrong motivations. He wanted to be associated with her success, to bask in reflected glory. She would not give him that satisfaction. Clara walked to Elias's office and handed him the letter. He read it, then looked at her questioningly. Are you going to accept? No, Clara said firmly. We'll build the nursing school ourselves. It will take longer and be harder, but it will be ours. Not tainted by his guilt or his need to rehabilitate his own reputation. Elias smiled, that particular smile that transformed his serious face. You've changed, you know. When you first came here, you were still trying to fit into their world. Now you're building your own. I had a good teacher, Clara replied. But she'd spoken too soon. Their fragile success was about to face its greatest test yet. 2 weeks later, the Royal College of Physicians issued a formal censure of Dr. Elias Rowan, citing his dangerous methods, his employment of unqualified persons, and his unethical treatment of vulnerable patients. The document specifically mentioned Clara by name, calling her a woman of questionable moral character, whose involvement in medical matters was unseemly and inappropriate. The censure wasn't legally binding, but its implications were devastating. Banks withdrew their support, donors canceled pledges, physicians who'd been considering joining the hospital backed away, afraid of damaging their own careers. Within a month, the hospital was on the verge of financial collapse. Elias fought desperately to save it, but the forces aligned against them were too powerful. The medical establishment wanted to make an example of him, to show what happened to doctors who challenged tradition and hierarchy. On a cold November evening, Elias called Clara into his office. His face was haggard, defeated. We're finished, he said quietly. I can't meet next month's rent. Can't pay the staff. The hospital will close before the new year. Clara felt her carefully rebuilt world crumbling again. There must be something we can do. There isn't. I've tried everything. We're out of options. Elias looked at her with profound regret. I'm so sorry, Clara. I promised you purpose, and instead I've dragged you into another disaster. Clara stood there, thinking of the patients they'd treated, the lives they'd saved, the nurses they'd begun to train, thinking of the nursing school that would now never exist, the women who would never get the education she'd promised them, thinking of how close they'd come to building something that mattered. And then, with sudden clarity, she realized something. They'd been playing by the establishment's rules, trying to work within a system designed to exclude people like them. But the system would never accept them, never give them permission to succeed, so they needed to stop asking for permission. Clara looked at Elias with new determination. What if we didn't close the hospital? What if we moved it somewhere the Royal College of Physicians has no power? There's nowhere in England they don't have influence. Then we make our own jurisdiction. Clara's mind raced, the plan forming even as she spoke. We move out of the city, find a building in a district where the medical establishment doesn't operate, set up as an independent institution that doesn't need their approval or their funding. Build something so effective, so necessary, that people come to us despite what the college says. That's insane, Elias said, but there was a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there moments before. It would mean starting over from nothing, working in conditions even worse than what we have now, fighting even harder for every patient, every penny. Yes, Clara agreed. It would mean all of that. But it would also mean freedom, real freedom, to practice medicine as it should be practiced, to train nurses as they should be trained, to build something that belongs to us and to the people we serve, not to them. Elias stood slowly, a smile spreading across his face. You really are remarkable, Clara Whitmore. I'm stubborn, Clara corrected, but there's a difference. So, are we doing this? Elias extended his hand. We're doing this. They shook on it there in that cramped office, two outcasts refusing to accept the world's verdict on their worth. And Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. The building they found was a former workhouse in Southwark, across the Thames in one of London's most desperate districts. The structure loomed grey and forbidding against the winter sky, its windows broken, its courtyard choked with weeds. It smelled of rot and abandonment. "It's perfect," Clara said. Elias looked at her as though she'd lost her mind. "Perfect?" "Clara, half the roof is missing. There's no running water. The neighborhood is—" "Exactly where people need us most," Clara interrupted. She walked through the debris-strewn entrance hall, her footsteps echoing. "Look at the bones of this place, Elias. High ceilings for ventilation, thick walls for insulation. Large rooms we can convert into wards. It's structurally sound, just neglected. We can't afford repairs on this scale." "Then we do them ourselves." Clara turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "We recruit volunteers. We barter services. We make this work because we have to." Over the next 6 weeks, they accomplished what should have been impossible. Clara contacted everyone she'd met during her months working with Elias: former patients, grateful families, workers from the docks who remembered the doctor who'd saved their friend's hand. She offered them a proposition: help rebuild the hospital, and they'd receive free medical care for life. The response stunned her. Men arrived with hammers and lumber. Women brought cleaning supplies and elbow grease. A glazier whose daughter Clara had tutored years ago replaced the broken windows at cost. A retired builder directed the roof repairs in exchange for treatment for his chronic gout. Clara worked alongside them, her hands blistering as she scrubbed floors and hauled debris. She climbed ladders to hang curtains, mixed plaster to patch walls, painted wards until her shoulders ached. The physical labor was exhausting, but strangely liberating. She was building something real, something permanent. Elias worked just as hard, though his focus was on equipping their makeshift hospital. He sold his own furniture to buy surgical instruments. He negotiated with suppliers, trading future services for immediate materials. He wrote to every progressive physician in Europe, explaining their vision and asking for donated medical texts. By early January, they opened the doors of the Southwark Medical Institute. The name was ambitious for a facility that consisted of 12 beds, 2 examination rooms, and a cramped office where Clara managed administration by candlelight. But the name wasn't about what they were. It was about what they intended to become. Their first patient was a factory worker who'd lost 3 fingers in a machine accident. The mangled hand was infected, and the man had been told amputation was his only option. Elias examined the wound with meticulous care. "I can save the hand," he said, "but the surgery will be painful, and recovery will take months. You'll need to trust me." The worker, a gaunt man named Samuel with terrified eyes, looked from Elias to Clara. "You're the ones who saved Lord Ashford's daughter." "We are," Clara confirmed. "Then I trust you." The surgery took 4 hours. Clara assisted, handing Elias instruments, monitoring Samuel's breathing, speaking calmly when the man's screams grew too loud. Elias worked with painstaking precision, cleaning the wound with antiseptic solution, removing dead tissue, carefully stitching the remaining fingers. When it was over, Samuel's hand was saved. Word spread through Southwark's teeming streets. There was a hospital that treated working people like human beings, that used new methods, that didn't charge what you couldn't pay. Within a month, they were overwhelmed. Patients arrived with knife wounds and tuberculosis, with workplace injuries and childhood diseases, with complications from pregnancy and infections that had festered for months because no doctor would see them. They came desperate and often dying, and Clara and Elias did their best to save them all. The work was brutal. Clara rarely slept more than 4 hours a night. She managed patient records, ordered supplies, assisted in surgeries, comforted frightened families, and somehow found time to continue her translations of medical literature. Her hands were perpetually stained with ink and carbolic solution. Her dresses, even the sturdy cotton ones she'd bought for work, grew worn and patched. But she'd never felt more alive. They hired 3 nurses, Sarah, Margaret, and young Ruth, women from the neighborhood who showed aptitude and hunger to learn. Clara began teaching them every evening, transforming the cramped office into a makeshift classroom. The heart has 4 chambers, Clara explained one night, using a detailed anatomical drawing she'd copied from a French textbook. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body. The right ventricle pumps it to the lungs. The left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the lungs. The left ventricle pumps it back to the body. Understanding this flow is critical when you're monitoring a patient's pulse and respiration. Sarah, a sharp-faced woman of 30 who'd been a laundress, leaned forward intently. So when someone's pulse is weak and their lips turn blue, that means the heart isn't pumping efficiently, not enough oxygenated blood is reaching the tissues. Clara smiled. Exactly right. What would you do? Elevate their legs to help blood return to the heart. Keep them warm. Fetch the doctor immediately. Perfect. Ruth, barely 18 and terrifyingly bright, raised her hand. Miss Clara, why aren't women allowed to be doctors? We can learn anatomy as well as men can. The question hung in the air. Margaret and Sarah looked at Clara expectantly. Because society fears competent women, Clara said quietly. They'd rather let people die than admit we're capable of more than needlework and childbearing, but that will change. We'll change it. How? Ruth pressed. By being so excellent they can't ignore us. By saving so many lives they can't deny our value. By building institutions like this one and refusing to be shut down. Clara met each woman's eyes in turn. You 3, you're pioneers, the first properly trained nurses in England. What you learn here you'll teach to others. And eventually we'll have so many skilled women in medicine that excluding us will become impossible. That's a beautiful dream, Miss Clara, Margaret said softly. But dreams don't pay the rent. She was right. Despite their growing patient load, money remained desperately scarce. Many patients couldn't pay at all. Those who could offered pennies or payment in kind, a chicken, a sack of potatoes, mending services. Clara performed miracles with their limited budget, but miracles couldn't stretch forever. Then, in March, disaster struck. A cholera outbreak swept through Southwark's overcrowded tenements. Patients flooded the hospital, men, women, children, all suffering from violent diarrhea and vomiting that left them dangerously dehydrated. Clara had translated papers about cholera treatment. She knew that aggressive fluid replacement could save lives, but their supplies were inadequate for an epidemic. We need clean water, lots of it, Elias said grimly, and we need it now. Also sugar, salt, clean linens, more beds. We don't have money for any of that, Clara interrupted. She was managing patient intake, and the waiting room was filled with desperate families. We're already 3 months behind on rent. Then we borrow, we beg, we steal if we have to. Elias grabbed his coat. I'm going to every apothecary and supplier in London. Someone will help. While he was gone, Clara managed the chaos. She set up a hydration station, mixing water with sugar and salt according to the Vienna protocol she'd translated. She organized the nurses into shifts, ensuring constant monitoring of the sickest patients. She held the hands of dying children and promised frantic mothers that everything possible was being done. The hospital's 12 beds quickly became 20 as they set up cots in hallways, then 30 as they cleared the storage rooms. Patients lay on blankets spread across the floor, and still more kept arriving. Clara worked without stopping, moving from bed to bed, checking pulses, administering fluids, recording symptoms. Her vision blurred with exhaustion. Her hands shook. But she couldn't stop. Lives depended on her. Late that night, Elias returned with supplies donated by a sympathetic pharmacist, but not nearly enough. We're going to lose people, he said, his voice hollow. We can't save them all, Clara. There are too many, and we're too few. Then we save who we can, Clara replied fiercely, and we don't stop trying. For 3 weeks, they battled the epidemic. Clara and Elias worked themselves to collapse, snatching sleep in 20-minute intervals between crises. The nurses proved their worth, performing with skill and compassion that would have shamed many qualified physicians. They saved 80% of their cholera patients, an extraordinary rate when London's other hospitals were losing half of theirs. But the cost was devastating. The epidemic drained their finances completely. They couldn't pay rent, couldn't pay the nurses, could barely afford food for themselves. And the medical establishment, which had been watching their little experiment with hostile interest, sensed blood in the water. The attack came from Dr. Cornelius Hartwick, the president of the Royal College of Physicians. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair, aristocratic bearing, and absolute conviction in the natural order of things. He'd built his career on tradition and viewed innovation as dangerous radicalism. He published an open letter in The Lancet, Britain's most prestigious medical journal. The so-called Southwark Medical Institute represents everything wrong with modern medicine. Dr. Elias Rowan, a physician of dubious credentials, has established an unregulated facility staffed by untrained women of questionable morals. Their reckless methods endanger patients and undermine the standards our profession has maintained for centuries. Most troubling is the presence of Miss Clara Whitmore, a woman whose notorious scandal I need not revisit, who presumes to practice medicine without qualification or oversight. This situation demands immediate investigation and, if warranted, legal intervention. The letter was calculated to destroy them. It impugned Elias's competence, the nurse's morality, and Clara's very right to exist in the medical sphere. Worse, it worked. Patients who'd been coming to the hospital began staying away, frightened by the official condemnation. Donors who'd been considering supporting them withdrew. The landlord, pressured by local authorities, demanded immediate payment of back rent or eviction. Clara read the letter in their office, her hands trembling with rage. "He's trying to erase us," she said quietly, "to make it as though we never existed." Elias looked defeated. "Maybe we should give up, Clara. We fought hard, but we lost. Sometimes that's how it ends." "No," Clara stood, her voice sharp. "We're not giving up. We're fighting back." "How?" "We have no money, no credibility, no support. We have the truth. We have evidence. We have 80 cholera patients who lived when they should have died." Clara's mind raced, formulating a plan as desperate as it was brilliant. "Hartwick wants a public battle? Then we'll give him one." Over the next week, Clara worked with ferocious determination. She compiled statistics from their cholera treatment, comparing their survival rates to those of traditional hospitals. She gathered testimonials from grateful patients. She documented every successful surgery, every life saved, every innovative technique they'd employed. Then she did something unprecedented. She wrote her own letter to The Lancet. Dr. Hartwick questions the legitimacy of the Southwark Medical Institute. "Very well, let us examine the evidence. During the recent cholera epidemic, traditional London hospitals lost approximately 50% of their patients. The Southwark Medical Institute, using antiseptic techniques and aggressive hydration protocols translated from German and French medical literature, saved 80% of ours." Dr. Hartwick dismisses our methods as reckless. I would ask him, is it more reckless to try new approaches that save lives or to cling to old methods that fail? Dr. Hartwick objects to women practicing medicine. Yet our trained nurses performed with competence that rivaled many physicians I have observed. They understood anatomy, recognized symptoms, and provided care that directly contributed to our high survival rate. Are we to sacrifice patients' lives to preserve men's pride? As for my own notorious scandal, I will not defend myself against gossip. My work speaks for itself. I have translated medical research that has saved lives. I have helped build an institution that serves those no other hospital will touch. If that makes me scandalous, I embrace the scandal. I challenge Dr. Hartwick to visit our facility, examine our methods, and speak to our patients. If, after such investigation, he still believes we should be shut down, let him present his case publicly. But let it be based on medical evidence, not social prejudice. Respectfully, Clara Whitmore, Administrator, Southwark Medical Institute. The Lancet published the letter. The response was explosive. Other medical journals picked up the controversy. Newspapers ran stories about the battle between tradition and innovation, between the medical establishment and upstart reformers. Suddenly, everyone in London had an opinion about Clara Whitmore and Dr. Elias Rowan. The progressive press championed them as heroes fighting against hidebound authority. The conservative press condemned them as dangerous radicals, undermining proper social order. Medical students debated their methods in university halls. Society ladies discussed them at tea parties. And patients, hundreds of patients, flooded back to the hospital, wanting to be treated by the doctors and nurses brave enough to challenge the Royal College of Physicians. But Dr. Hartwick wasn't finished. He arrived at the hospital one cold April morning with an entourage. Two other senior physicians, a representative from the Metropolitan Board of Works, and a police constable. Clara met them in the entrance hall, her spine straight, her expression calm despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Dr. Hartwick," she said evenly, "welcome to the Southwark Medical Institute." Hartwick's eyes were cold. "Miss Whitmore, I'm here to conduct the investigation you demanded. I trust you'll grant us full access to your facility and records?" "Of course. We have nothing to hide." What followed was 6 hours of intensive scrutiny. Hartwick and his colleagues examined every patient, questioned every treatment decision, reviewed every record. They inspected the wards with expressions of barely concealed distaste, noting the patched walls and makeshift equipment. Clara accompanied them throughout, answering questions with precise detail. She explained their antiseptic protocols, demonstrated their hand-washing procedures, showed them the anatomical charts she used to train the nurses. Hartwick's expression never changed from one of cold skepticism. Finally, as evening fell, he gathered everyone in the main ward, staff, patients, and his own entourage. "I have completed my investigation," Hartwick announced, his voice carrying through the crowded room, "and I must report that this facility operates in clear violation of medical standards and public health regulations. The staff are unqualified, the methods are unproven and potentially dangerous. The conditions are unsanitary." "That's a lie!" Sarah burst out. She stood beside a patient she'd been tending, her face flushed with anger. "We keep everything clean. We follow proper procedures. We save lives." "You follow procedures taught to you by an untrained woman," Hartwick replied dismissively. "Miss Whitmore, despite her evident intelligence, has no medical degree, no formal education in anatomy or physiology, no credentials whatsoever. She has no right to teach medicine." "I have the right of knowledge," Clara said quietly. "I've read more medical literature than most physicians in London. I've translated research from the finest medical institutions in Europe. I've assisted in surgeries that saved lives. My lack of formal credentials doesn't negate what I know." "Your arrogance is astounding," Hartwick turned to the Board of Works representative. "I recommend immediate closure of this facility pending proper licensing and oversight. All patients should be transferred to recognized hospitals where they can receive appropriate care." "No!" The shout came from Samuel, the factory worker whose hand Elias had saved. He stood, holding up his scarred but functional hand. "This hospital saved me when every other doctor said amputation was my only option. Dr. Rowan and Miss Clara gave me back my livelihood, my ability to work, to hold my children. You can't shut them down." Other patients joined in, their voices rising in protest. A woman whose life Clara had saved during childbirth. A child whose tuberculosis was responding to a new treatment protocol Elias had developed. A dock worker whose infected wound had healed cleanly under Sarah's careful nursing. Their testimonials were passionate and genuine. But Hartwick remained unmoved. "Your gratitude is understandable but irrelevant. Medical practice must be regulated to protect the public, even from well-intentioned charlatans." He produced a document from his coat. "This is a closure order. You have 1 week to cease operations and vacate the premises." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. After everything they'd built, everything they'd survived, it was ending like this. Killed not by failure, but by bureaucratic power. Elias stepped forward, his face pale. "Dr. Hartwick, please. Give us time to acquire proper licensing. We'll meet whatever requirements you set. Just don't destroy what we've built." "The requirements include formally educated physicians and qualified nursing staff, requirements you cannot possibly meet." Hartwick's expression was almost satisfied. "Medicine is a profession, Dr. Rowan, not a hobby for radicals and scandalous women. Perhaps this will teach you that lesson." He turned to leave, and Clara felt rage explode in her chest, white-hot and clarifying. "You're not doing this to protect patients," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You're doing this to protect your power. You're terrified that we've proven you wrong, that our methods work better than yours, that women can learn medicine as well as men, that poor people deserve the same quality care as the wealthy." Hartwick turned back slowly. "Careful, Miss Whitmore." "Why should I be careful? What more can you take from me?" Clara advanced on him, years of humiliation and struggle fueling her words. "You've already destroyed my reputation. tried to prevent me from working, condemned me for having the audacity to be competent despite being born female and poor, but I'm still here, and I'll keep being here no matter how many closure orders you issue. Then you'll be arrested for illegal medical practice. Arrest me, Clara challenged. Take me to court. Let a judge examine the evidence of what we've accomplished here. Let the public see you destroying a hospital that serves those no one else will help. See how that serves your precious reputation. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room was fixed on Clara and Hartwick, locked in a battle of wills that transcended medicine and touched something deeper. The fundamental question of who had the right to heal, to teach, to matter. Hartwick's jaw tightened. 1 week, Miss Whitmore. Then this establishment closes. And if you attempt to continue practicing medicine in any capacity, I will personally ensure you're prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He swept out, his entourage following. The moment the door closed, Clara's knees buckled. Elias caught her, holding her steady as reaction set in. What do we do? He whispered. Clara didn't answer immediately. Her mind was racing through possibilities, calculating odds, searching for any path forward that didn't end in complete defeat. Then she remembered something. A conversation from months ago, a letter she'd refused. I need to see the Duke, she said quietly. Elias pulled back, staring at her. What? Clara, no. After what he did to you, he offered to support the nursing school. I refused because I was proud, because I wanted to succeed without his help. Clara's voice was steady now, hardened by necessity. But this isn't about my pride anymore. It's about the hospital, the nurses, the patients. If Blackthorn's support can save all that, then I'll swallow my pride and ask for it. He humiliated you in front of all of London, and I'll give him the opportunity to make amends. If he refuses, Clara's expression was grim. Then at least I'll know I tried everything. She borrowed clean clothes from Margaret, washed the hospital smell from her skin as best she could, and set out for Mayfair. The walk from Southwark to Grosvenor Square was like traveling between different worlds. Clara moved from narrow streets thick with coal smoke to broad avenues lined with elegant townhouses. Her patched cotton dress looked grotesque against the backdrop of silk and velvet worn by the ladies she passed. But Clara no longer cared what she looked like to them. She'd learned that respectability was a cage, and she'd broken free. Blackthorn House loomed before her, triggering memories of the last time she'd stood here, the night everything had fallen apart. Clara pushed the memories aside and climbed the steps. The butler who answered the door recognized her. His eyes widened with shock. Miss Whitmore, that is, His Grace is not receiving. Tell him Clara Whitmore is here on a matter of urgent business. If he refuses to see me, I'll stand on his doorstep and tell every passing aristocrat exactly why. The threat was effective. 10 minutes later, Clara was shown into the Duke's private study. Adrian Blackthorn stood by the window, his back to the door. He'd changed in the months since she'd seen him, thinner, with lines of tension around his eyes and mouth. He turned slowly as she entered. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. You received my letter, he said finally. I did. You never responded. I was busy saving lives. Clara's voice was sharper than she'd intended. Your Grace, I'm here because I need your help. The Royal College of Physicians is shutting down our hospital. Dr. Hartwick has issued a closure order, and without powerful patronage, we can't fight it. Adrian's expression was unreadable. I'm aware of the situation. The conflict has been rather public. Then you know what's at stake. We've built something revolutionary, a hospital that actually serves the poor, that trains women in medicine, that uses the most advanced techniques available. If Hartwick destroys it, hundreds of people will suffer. Perhaps thousands, if you consider the future impact of the nursing school we're planning. And you want me to intervene, to use my influence to protect your hospital? Yes. The word cost Clara dearly. I'm asking for your help, your financial support, your social standing, your ability to pressure the Royal College. In exchange, she hesitated, calculating. In exchange, I'll give you what you wanted before. I'll marry you. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Adrian turned back to the window, his shoulders rigid. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. You would sell yourself to save your hospital. I would make a strategic alliance to save lives, Clara corrected. Isn't that what you wanted originally? A practical arrangement, a suitable wife who understands her place? Is that truly what you think I wanted? Adrian turned back to face her, and Clara was startled to see pain in his amber eyes. You believe I'm so callous, so calculating? I believe you're a man who publicly humiliated me when I no longer served your purposes, Clara replied coldly. What you wanted is irrelevant. The question is whether you'll help me now. Adrian crossed the room to his desk, poured himself whiskey with shaking hands. I need to tell you something, Clara. Something I should have told you months ago. I didn't come here for confessions. Lady Seraphina Vale, he interrupted. You noticed her at the ball. You were right. I had feelings for her, deep feelings. But she was married to Lord Vale, and I could never act on them. When her husband died last year, I thought... He drank deeply. I thought perhaps we could finally be together, but her family forbade it, said the scandal of such a quick remarriage would destroy her reputation. Clara felt ice forming in her stomach. So you agreed to marry me instead. The sensible choice. I agreed because I was furious and hurt and wanted to prove I didn't need love. Adrian's laugh was bitter. What an arrogant fool I was. Then at the ball, Seraphina approached me privately, said she'd reconsidered, that if I truly loved her, I'd wait for a proper mourning period to elapse, and then we'd marry. She gave me an ultimatum, her or you. And you chose her, Clara finished quietly. I chose what I thought was love. But the moment I publicly rejected you, the moment I saw the devastation in your eyes, I knew I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Not because I didn't love Seraphina, but because what I did to you was unforgivable, regardless of my reasons. Adrian set down his glass with a sharp click. I'm sorry, Clara. I'm profoundly, wretchedly sorry. You deserved better. Clara stood very still, absorbing his words. Part of her wanted to rage at him, to make him feel a fraction of the pain she'd endured. But another part, the part that had survived and rebuilt and grown stronger, simply felt tired. Your apology changes nothing, she said, but your influence could change everything. Will you help me save the hospital or not? Adrian studied her for a long moment. If I help you, if I use my power to protect your hospital and fund your nursing school, I don't want your hand in marriage as payment. I want your forgiveness. You can't buy forgiveness, Your Grace. I'm not trying to buy it. I'm trying to earn it. Let me help you build what you've dreamed of. No conditions, no expectations, no debt between us. Just let me try to make amends. Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him that his guilt was his problem, not hers. But she thought of Sarah and Margaret and Ruth, who deserved to complete their training, of the patients who needed care, of the vision she and Elias shared. Very well, she said quietly. Help us. But understand this. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for them. I understand. Adrian moved quickly once committed. Within 24 hours, he'd arranged a meeting with Dr. Hartwick at the Royal College of Physicians. Clara and Elias attended, though every instinct screamed at Clara to run from this confrontation. The meeting room was imposing. Dark wood paneling, portraits of past college presidents glaring down from the walls, a massive table that emphasized the power differential between them and Hartwick. The Duke of Blackthorn commanded attention the moment he entered. His rank, his bearing, his aristocratic authority filled the room. Dr. Hartwick, Adrian said without preamble, I'm here regarding the Southwark Medical Institute. Hartwick's expression tightened. Your Grace, this is a medical matter. It's a matter that interests me personally. I intend to become the primary patron of the Institute. I will be funding its expansion, endowing its nursing school, and ensuring it has the resources to obtain whatever licensing you require. I trust that addresses your concerns about its legitimacy? Hartwick's face reddened. Your Grace, surely you understand that this facility's methods are highly questionable. Their methods saved 80% of cholera patients when traditional hospitals saved 50%. Their methods are backed by the latest European research. Their methods work. Adrian's voice was ice. Unless you're prepared to argue that effective medicine should be suppressed to preserve tradition, there are standards, which they will meet. I will personally fund the hiring of additional licensed physicians. I will ensure the facility meets all building codes and safety regulations. I will establish an endowment sufficient to guarantee its financial stability. Adrian leaned forward slightly. In short, Dr. Hartwick, I will remove every legitimate objection you have. The only remaining question is whether your opposition is based on legitimate medical concerns or on prejudice against women and the poor having access to quality health care. The challenge hung in the air. Hartwick could oppose the Duke of Blackthorn, but doing so would expose his true motivations and cost him dearly in terms of social standing and influence. After a long silence, Hartwick inclined his head stiffly. If the facility meets proper standards, the college will, of course, withdraw its opposition. Excellent, Adrian said. I'll expect confirmation in writing by tomorrow. As they left the Royal College, Clara felt stunned by what had just happened. With a few words, Adrian had dismantled the threat that had seemed insurmountable. Thank you, she said as they stood on the steps outside. It was the least I could do. Adrian turned to her, his expression grave. Clara, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to say it. What you've built, the hospital, the nursing program, your own transformation from governess to medical pioneer, it's extraordinary. You were never just adequate. You were always exceptional. I was simply too blind to see it. Clara met his eyes steadily. You're right. I was exceptional, but I didn't need your validation to know that. I learned my worth despite you, not because of you. Something flickered across Adrian's face. Regret, admiration, perhaps both. Then I'm grateful you learned it. The world needs more women like you. He left in his carriage, and Clara stood alone on the street, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted. She'd come to the Duke as a supplicant, prepared to sacrifice herself again for a greater cause, but she'd left as an equal, having accepted help without surrendering her dignity. The hospital was saved. The nursing school would become reality. Everything she'd fought for would continue. But as Clara walked back to Southwark, she couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Something about the encounter felt incomplete, as though the story wasn't quite finished. She arrived at the hospital to find chaos. Patients crowded the entrance, but these weren't the usual sick or injured seeking treatment. These were angry people, men with rough faces and rougher hands, women with hard eyes, all shouting accusations. "Where is she?" someone yelled. "Where's the whore who thinks she's better than us?" Clara pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. Inside, she found Elias trying to calm a group of neighborhood women who'd forced their way into the main ward. "You don't belong here," one of them shrieked at Clara. "You're one of them, the aristocracy. You use us for your experiments, make yourself feel noble by helping the poor, but you'll never be one of us." "That's not true," Clara said, keeping her voice level despite her fear. "I've lived in Southwark for months. I've worked alongside you, cared for your families. You worked here because you had nowhere else to go," another woman interrupted. "But now your Duke has taken you back. We heard about your meeting with Blackthorn. You're going to marry him and abandon us just like we always knew you would." "I'm not marrying anyone," Clara protested. "The Duke is supporting the hospital financially, that's all." "Liar!" Someone threw a bottle that shattered against the wall near Clara's head. "You think we're stupid? You used us to rebuild your reputation so you could go back to your own kind. Well, we don't want your charity anymore." The crowd surged forward, and Clara saw genuine violence in their eyes. These were people who'd been used and betrayed too many times, who saw her alliance with the Duke as proof of their worst suspicions. Elias grabbed Clara's arm. "We need to get you out of here." "I'm not leaving the hospital." "Clara, they're going to hurt you." The crowd was destroying everything, overturning beds, smashing equipment, tearing down the anatomical charts Clara had so carefully drawn. Sarah and the other nurses huddled in a corner, terrified. Patients who'd been resting in the wards fled into the street, and Clara stood frozen, watching everything she'd built being torn apart, not by the medical establishment this time, but by the very people she'd been trying to help. This was the cost of her compromise, the price of accepting Adrian's assistance. She'd gained the establishment's approval, but lost the trust of those who mattered most. The irony was devastating. "Stop!" Clara's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. The mob paused, bottles raised, furniture overturned around them. In the sudden quiet, Clara stepped forward into the center of the destroyed ward. "You want to know the truth?" she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Then I'll tell you. Yes, I met with the Duke of Blackthorn. Yes, he's offered financial support. And yes, I accepted it. Not for myself, but for this hospital. For you. We don't need a duchess's charity, someone shouted. You're right. You don't need charity. You need medicine. You need trained nurses. You need a hospital that won't turn you away when you're dying. Clara's eyes blazed. And I need resources to provide those things. The Duke has money and influence I'll never possess. Should I refuse his help and let this place close just to preserve my pride? Let your children die of preventable diseases because I'm too stubborn to accept assistance from someone who wronged me? You'll marry him and leave us, the woman who'd called her a liar said, but her voice had lost some of its venom. I will never marry the Duke of Blackthorn, Clara stated flatly. I don't love him. I don't forgive him. I simply used his guilt to get what we need to survive. Is that manipulative? Yes. Is it necessary? Absolutely. She turned slowly, meeting as many eyes as she could. I was born poor, just like you. My father was a clerk who died, leaving my mother and me with nothing. I became a governess because it was the only respectable work available. Then I made the mistake of trying to climb above my station, and the Duke destroyed me for it. Everything you've heard about the scandal is true. I was publicly humiliated, ruined, cast out. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some of the anger drained from their faces. But I didn't disappear, Clara continued. I came here to Southwark because this is where people like us survive. I worked in this hospital because saving lives mattered more than protecting my reputation. I taught those nurses, she gestured to Sarah, Margaret, and Ruth, still huddled together, because women deserve the same opportunities as men, whether we're born in palaces or tenements. Then why ally with him? A man demanded. Why not build something that's truly ours without their money corrupting it? Because I tried that, and Dr. Hartwick nearly destroyed us. Clara's voice cracked with emotion. I tried to fight the system without resources, and we almost lost everything. So yes, I'm taking money from a duke who wronged me. I'm using his guilt and his privilege to protect what we've built. If that makes me a hypocrite, so be it. But I will not let this hospital die because of my pride or your purity. Silence fell over the ward. The mob's fury had burned itself out, leaving only exhaustion and uncertainty. Samuel, the factory worker whose hand Elias had saved, stepped forward. Miss Clara speaks truth. Before this hospital, I had nowhere to go. Every doctor wanted to amputate, take the easy path. But Dr. Rowan and Miss Clara fought for me, saved my hand, saved my livelihood. He held up his scarred but functional hand. I don't care where the money comes from, long as the medicine stays good. My daughter would be dead without them, another woman added quietly. Childbed fever. Every midwife said to pray and prepare for death. Miss Clara sat with us all night, using techniques she learned from foreign books. My girl lived. That's what matters. One by one, former patients spoke up. Their testimonies were powerful, undeniable. The hospital had saved lives that would have been lost elsewhere. The mob began to disperse, shame replacing anger on many faces. The woman who'd called Clara a liar approached hesitantly. I'm sorry, she said, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. We've been used before, you understand. Charity workers who come here feeling noble, then leave when it gets too hard. We thought you were like them. I understand, Clara replied, though her voice was weary. But I'm not leaving. This is my home now. These are my people, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect this place, even if it means making deals with devils. After the crowd left, Clara surveyed the damage. Broken furniture, shattered glass, torn linens, hours of work destroyed in minutes. Sarah approached, tears streaming down her face. Miss Clara, I'm so sorry. We should have defended you better. You were frightened, outnumbered. You did nothing wrong. Clara squeezed her shoulder. But we have work to do. Patients will still need care, and this ward won't rebuild itself. They worked through the night, salvaging what they could, improvising what they couldn't. Elias found undamaged mattresses in storage. Margaret stitched torn curtains back together. Ruth swept broken glass until her hands bled. By dawn, the ward looked shabby but functional. And as the sun rose, patients began returning, tentatively at first, then in steady streams. Word had spread about Clara's speech, about her refusal to abandon them. Trust, once broken, was being rebuilt. Over the following weeks, the Duke's patronage transformed the hospital. Adrian was true to his word. He provided funding without interference, supporting their vision rather than imposing his own. They hired 2 additional physicians, both young progressives who'd been blacklisted by traditional hospitals for their radical ideas. Dr. James Mitchell specialized in pediatric care, bringing knowledge of childhood diseases that had previously killed half the children in Southwark. Dr. Anna Berkeley, one of the few women who'd managed to obtain medical training in Switzerland, focused on women's health, providing care with a compassion and understanding male physicians rarely showed. The nursing program expanded dramatically. With proper funding, Clara developed a formal curriculum that would take 2 years to complete. Students would learn anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and surgical assistance. They'd study disease processes, hygiene protocols, and patient care. Upon completion, they'd receive certificates recognizing them as trained professional nurses, the first such program in England. 20 women applied for the first class. Clara interviewed each one personally, looking not just for intelligence but for dedication and resilience. "Why do you want to be a nurse?" she asked Mary, a seamstress's daughter with calloused hands and fierce eyes. "My mother died of childbed fever when I was 12, Mary replied. "The midwife said it was natural, that women just die sometimes. But I've read the pamphlets you published, the ones about hand washing and antiseptic techniques. My mother didn't have to die. She died because of ignorance. I want to make sure other women don't." "The training will be difficult," Clara warned. "You'll see things that disturb you. Blood, suffering, death. You'll work long hours for minimal pay. Society will look down on you for choosing this path." "Society already looks down on me for being poor," Mary said simply. "At least this way I'll be doing something that matters." Clara accepted her on the spot. The nursing school opened in June with 20 students crowded into a converted storeroom that served as their classroom. Clara taught alongside Dr. Berkeley, combining theoretical knowledge with practical experience. "The human body contains approximately 5 liters of blood," Clara explained, using detailed anatomical drawings on the chalkboard. "When a patient is hemorrhaging, you need to assess quickly how much they've lost. A cup of blood looks like a terrifying amount when it's soaked into bedding, but it may not be life-threatening. However, if a patient has lost more than 2 liters, approximately 40% of their total volume, they're in grave danger. What signs would you look for?" Hands shot up. These women were hungry for knowledge, absorbing everything with an intensity that reminded Clara of herself years ago. "Rapid, weak pulse," one student answered. "Pale, clammy skin," another added. "Confusion or loss of consciousness," a third contributed. "Excellent. And what would you do?" "Elevate their legs to help blood flow to vital organs. Apply pressure to the bleeding site. Fetch the doctor immediately. Keep the patient warm to prevent shock." Clara smiled. "Perfect. You're learning faster than many medical students I've observed." The comparison wasn't flattery. It was truth. These women, denied formal education for most of their lives, proved just as capable as their male counterparts when given the opportunity. Some were even better, bringing practical experience from caring for families through illness and injury. As the nursing program flourished, Clara's role evolved. She was no longer just a translator or administrator. She was an educator, shaping the future of medical care in England. The work was demanding, but deeply fulfilling. She also developed an unexpected friendship with Dr. Anna Berkeley. Anna was 35, sharp-tongued, and utterly brilliant. She'd fought her own battles to practice medicine, studying in Switzerland because English universities wouldn't admit women, then returning to face constant discrimination. "They call me a medical curiosity," Anna told Clara one evening as they reviewed patient charts together. "As though my gender makes me a freak rather than a physician. I've had male colleagues refuse to work with me. I've had patients reject my care, preferring to die under a man's incompetent treatment than live under a woman's skilled hand." "How do you bear it?" Clara asked. "By being undeniably excellent, by saving lives they can't save, by training women like your nurses who'll multiply my impact 100-fold. Anna's expression was fierce. "We're not just treating patients, Clara. We're waging war against centuries of prejudice. Every woman we train is a victory. Every life we save is proof they were wrong about us." Clara understood that conviction in her bones. It was what drove her through exhaustion, what sustained her through setbacks. But even as the hospital thrived, Clara's personal life remained isolated. She lived in a small apartment near the hospital, spending virtually all her time working. She had colleagues but few friends. The social ostracism that had followed her scandal never fully disappeared. Respectable society still viewed her as damaged goods. She didn't care, or she told herself she didn't. Then one autumn evening, Elias knocked on her apartment door with an unusual expression on his face. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "Thomas Blackthorne." Clara's breath caught. Thomas, the little boy she'd tutored, who'd become like family during her brief time at Blackthorne House. She hadn't seen him since the night of the ball, hadn't allowed herself to think about how much she missed him. "He's downstairs in your office. His guardian brought him." Clara's heart clenched. "The Duke is here?" "No, Mrs. Helena Blackthorne. She says she has a proposition for you." Clara found Thomas first, now 10 years old, taller and more serious than she remembered. When he saw her, his face lit up with a joy that made tears prick her eyes. "Miss Clara." He ran to her, and she caught him in a fierce embrace. "You've grown so much," she said, her voice thick. "I've missed you terribly. Uncle Adrian said I shouldn't bother you, that you have important work, but I begged Aunt Helena to bring me. I had to see you." "I've missed you too, sweetheart." Mrs. Helena Blackthorne watched this reunion with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. When Thomas finally released Clara, the older woman stepped forward. "Miss Whitmore, you're looking well." "Thank you, Mrs. Blackthorne. I'm surprised to see you." "I suspect you are." Helena settled into a chair with regal composure. "I've been following your progress with great interest. Your hospital, your nursing school, it's remarkable work." "It's necessary work," Clara corrected. "Indeed, which is why I'm here with a proposal." Helena folded her hands in her lap. "I wish to endow a scholarship fund for your nursing program, specifically to support young women from impoverished backgrounds who wish to pursue medical training but cannot afford it." Clara stared at her. "Why?" "Because I was wrong about you." Helena's voice was quiet but firm. "I thought you were a practical solution to a social problem. I failed to see that you were a woman of extraordinary capability who would have been wasted as a duchess. My nephew was a fool to reject you as he did, but perhaps it was for the best. You've achieved far more than you ever could have as Adrian's wife." The acknowledgement was stunning. Clara had never expected vindication from this woman, this pillar of aristocratic society who'd tried to mold her into something acceptable. "I don't need your approval," Clara said carefully, "but I appreciate your support for the nursing program. The scholarship fund would change lives." "Then you accept?" "I do, with gratitude." Thomas had been listening to this exchange with wide eyes. "Does this mean you'll visit us again, Miss Clara? I could show you my mathematics work. I'm studying geometry now, just like you taught me." Clara looked at Helena questioningly. "You would be welcome," the older woman said, "if you're willing. I understand if you prefer to keep your distance from our family, given the circumstances." Clara considered. The idea of stepping back into Blackthorne House held no appeal. Too many painful memories. But Thomas deserved better than to lose her because of his guardian's mistakes. "I won't come to Grosvenor Square," Clara said gently. "But Thomas, you're welcome to visit me here any time your Aunt Helena permits. I'd love to see your mathematics work." The boy's face split into a brilliant smile. After they left, Clara sat alone in her office, feeling as though another piece of her broken past had been fitted back together. Not repaired. The cracks would always show, but acknowledged, accepted. She was building a new life from the fragments of the old one, and it was becoming something stronger than what had been destroyed. The nursing school's first class graduated the following spring. 12 women completed the rigorous 2-year program, passing examinations that covered everything from anatomy to surgical procedures. They stood in the hospital's main ward wearing crisp white uniforms Clara had designed, receiving their certificates before an audience of patients, staff, and supporters. "You are the first," Clara told them, her voice resonant with pride and emotion. "The first professionally trained nurses in England. You've proven that women can master medical knowledge as well as any man. You've demonstrated competence, compassion, and courage. You'll go into hospitals, into homes, into communities that desperately need your skills. And everywhere you go, you'll prove that we belong in medicine, that our hands can heal as surely as any physician's. The applause was thunderous. Patients who'd been treated by these women stood and cheered. Physicians who'd worked alongside them nodded approval. Even a few reporters from progressive newspapers had come to witness this historic moment. Sarah, Margaret, and Ruth were among the graduates, the three who'd been with Clara from the beginning. They'd transformed from untrained women into skilled medical professionals, and their success validated everything Clara had fought for. After the ceremony, Dr. Berkeley approached Clara with unusual excitement in her eyes. "I've received a letter from the London hospital," she said. "They're requesting our graduates. They want to hire trained nurses rather than continue with their current system of untrained attendants. Clara, do you understand what this means? A major London hospital is officially recognizing our program." "It means we've won," Clara said softly. "Not completely, not permanently, but we've proven our worth in a way they can't ignore." Other hospitals followed. Within months, graduates of the Southwark nursing program were working across London, bringing modern techniques and professional standards to institutions that had never imagined women could perform such roles. The program expanded. More students applied than they could accept. Clara began planning a larger facility, a proper school with dormitories, classrooms, and practice wards. Elias watched this growth with satisfaction, mixed with bittersweet realization. "You've outgrown me," he told Clara one evening as they reviewed architectural plans for the new school. "This vision, it's bigger than what I imagined for the hospital. You should lead it independently." "What are you talking about? We're partners." "We were partners when you needed a physician to legitimize your work, but you don't need that anymore. You've created something entirely your own, a nursing school that's changing medicine. You should run it without being tethered to my hospital." Clara studied his face, seeing genuine support rather than resentment. "You're serious." "Completely. I'll help however I can, provide clinical training space, support your graduates, collaborate on curriculum. But the school should be yours. The Whitmore School of Nursing." The name hung between them, revolutionary in its implication. A school bearing a woman's name. Her name. The name that had once been synonymous with scandal and shame, now representing professional excellence. "Not just my name," Clara said slowly. "The Whitmore Rowan School of Nursing and Midwifery. You've been part of this from the beginning. We build it together, even if we run separate institutions." Elias smiled, that transformation of his serious face that Clara had come to treasure. "Together, then." They shook hands on it, and Clara felt the future opening before her like a road stretching to the horizon. The new school took shape over the following year. With the Duke's continued patronage and Helena's scholarship fund, they purchased a building in Southwark that had once been a workhouse, the same grim structure Clara and Elias had first transformed into their hospital. Now they were expanding it, creating dedicated spaces for education and training. Clara oversaw every detail. She designed the curriculum to be even more comprehensive, adding courses in nutrition, psychology, and public health. She recruited additional instructors, Dr. Berkeley, several progressive physicians, and graduates from their first class who showed aptitude for teaching. The school officially opened in September 1851 with 50 students in its first year. The entrance requirements were rigorous. Applicants needed to demonstrate literacy, basic mathematics, and genuine commitment to the profession. Social class was irrelevant. Clara accepted the daughter of a lord and the daughter of a washerwoman, judging them solely on merit. On opening day, Clara stood before the assembled students in the school's largest classroom, a bright space with tall windows and rows of benches, anatomical charts covering the walls. "Welcome to the Whitmore Rowan School of Nursing and Midwifery," she began. "You are here because you chose a difficult path. Society will not always respect your choice. Many will view nursing as menial work beneath their notice. But I tell you this, you are embarking on one of the most important professions in existence. You will save lives. You will ease suffering. You will bring knowledge and compassion to people in their darkest moments." She paused, looking at each young face turned toward her with such hope and determination. "I was once told I was adequate, suitable, good enough for a practical purpose, but nothing more. I want you to understand something crucial. You are not adequate. You are exceptional. Every one of you who completes this program will possess knowledge and skills most physicians lack. You will be pioneers, proving what women can achieve when given opportunity and education. But we're not physicians, a student said hesitantly. We'll still be subordinate to male doctors. For now, Clara agreed. But nursing is just the beginning. 10 years ago, there were no professionally trained nurses in England. Now there are hundreds, and that number will grow. 20 years from now, there may be women physicians. 50 years from now, medical schools may admit women as a matter of course. Change happens slowly, but it happens. You are part of making it happen. The student's eyes shone with understanding and ambition. As the weeks progressed, Clara found profound satisfaction in teaching. These young women were brilliant, dedicated, hungry for knowledge. They dissected frogs and studied cadavers without flinching. They practiced bandaging techniques until their hands moved with practiced precision. They learned to recognize symptoms of hundreds of diseases, to calculate drug dosages, to assist in complex surgeries. They also learned the softer skills, how to comfort frightened patients, how to communicate with physicians who might not respect them, how to advocate for proper care even when facing resistance. You will encounter doctors who dismiss your observations, Clara told them during a lesson on professional conduct, who assume you're ignorant because you're female. When this happens, do not argue emotionally. Present facts. State your observations clearly and professionally. Document everything. Build a reputation for competence so solid that even the most prejudiced physician must acknowledge your value. But that's not fair, Mary protested. We have to prove ourselves constantly, while men are assumed competent until proven otherwise. You're absolutely right. It's not fair. But fairness is a luxury we don't yet possess. What we have is excellence. So we'll be undeniably, irrefutably excellent until they have no choice but to change. Clara's own reputation continued to evolve. The woman who'd once been known only as the disgraced governess was now recognized as a pioneering educator. Medical journals published articles about her nursing program. Reform-minded politicians cited her work as evidence that women could contribute to public health. Other cities began establishing their own nursing schools, modeling them on Clara's program. She received invitations to speak at universities, at medical conferences, at reform societies. She declined most. Her work at the school was too important to neglect, but she accepted a few strategic opportunities to advocate for women's education and professional opportunities. One such invitation came from the London Society for Women's Education, a group of progressive reformers pushing for greater access to higher learning. Clara agreed to speak at their annual meeting, held in a respectable hall in Bloomsbury. The audience was mostly women, educators, reformers, wealthy philanthropists interested in social causes. But there were also men, physicians curious about her methods, journalists looking for stories, politicians assessing public opinion. And in the back row, almost hidden in shadow, sat the Duke of Blackthorn. Clara's breath caught when she saw him, but she didn't falter. She'd learned to compartmentalize her past, to separate her personal pain from her professional purpose. She spoke about the nursing school's success, about the hundreds of women now working in hospitals across England, about the lives saved through proper training and modern techniques. She argued passionately for expanding women's access to medical education, for opening universities to female students, for recognizing that half of humanity's intellectual potential was being wasted through systematic exclusion. We are told that women are too delicate for medical work, Clara said, her voice carrying through the hall. Yet, women have always been healers, midwives, caregivers. We are told our minds are unsuited for scientific study. Yet my students master anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology as readily as any male medical student. We are told our proper sphere is the home. Yet thousands of women work in factories, in fields, in service, labor far harder than medicine, for wages that barely sustain life. She paused, letting her words sink in. The question is not whether women are capable. We've proven our capability beyond doubt. The question is whether society has the courage to acknowledge that capability and grant us the opportunities we've earned. The applause was sustained and fervent. After her speech, Clara was surrounded by people wanting to discuss her work, to offer support, to share their own experiences fighting for women's rights. Adrian waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. "That was extraordinary, so," he said quietly. "You've become quite the orator." I've become someone who refuses to be silenced, Clara replied evenly. What are you doing here? Listening? Learning? He hesitated. Clara, I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Prouder than I have any right to be, given how I treated you. You're right. I don't want to hear it. But Clara's voice lacked the bitterness it might once have held. Time and success had dulled the sharpest edges of her anger. Then I'll simply say this. If there's ever anything more I can do to support your work, you need only ask. You've done enough, Your Grace. More than enough. The patronage you've provided has made everything possible. The patronage is minimal compared to what you've built. Adrian's amber eyes were earnest. You took my money and my influence and created something revolutionary. That's not my accomplishment. It's yours. For the first time since the midsummer ball, Clara looked at Adrian and saw not the man who'd humiliated her, but simply another person navigating the complexities of life and regret. Thank you, she said, for the support, for the acknowledgement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have students waiting. She walked away without looking back, feeling lighter somehow. The Duke's validation meant less now than it would have years ago. She'd learned to validate herself. Back at the school, Clara found a letter waiting on her desk. The seal was official, formal. She didn't recognize it. Inside was an invitation from the Queen's personal physician, requesting that Clara present her nursing program to a royal commission investigating hospital reform in England. Clara stared at the letter, barely able to process what it meant. A royal commission, an official recognition that her work mattered at the highest levels of government. She called Dr. Berkeley into her office, handed her the letter wordlessly. Anna read it, then looked up with stunned delight. Clara, do you understand what this is? If the Royal Commission endorses your program, every hospital in England will adopt it. You'll have transformed medical care across the entire nation. It's not certain yet, Clara cautioned, but excitement bubbled in her chest. They might investigate and decide our methods are too radical. Or they might investigate and realize you've solved problems that have plagued hospitals for centuries. Anna gripped Clara's hands. This is it. This is the victory we've been fighting for. Clara met her friend's eyes and saw her own hope reflected there. They'd come so far from those desperate early days in Whitechapel, from the tiny hospital that had almost been destroyed by the medical establishment's opposition. Now that same establishment was asking to learn from them. The presentation was scheduled for 3 months hence. Plenty of time to prepare, but not enough to quell Clara's nervous energy. She threw herself into documenting their methods, compiling statistics, gathering testimonials from physicians whose hospitals employed their graduates. The night before the presentation, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her apartment, looking out over Southwark's rooftops, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 5 years ago, she'd stood in a ballroom wearing borrowed jewels and a false smile, playing a role written by others. Now she stood in her own home, preparing to speak before royal commissioners about work she'd created through her own vision and will. She'd lost everything that night at the midsummer ball, reputation, security, prospects. But in losing everything, she'd gained the freedom to build something entirely her own. And what she'd built was changing the world. The morning of the Royal Commission hearing arrived with unseasonable warmth, sunlight streaming through Clara's window like a benediction. She dressed with deliberate care, not in the silks and jewels that had once defined her brief aristocratic interlude, but in a simple dark blue dress that marked her as a professional woman. She pinned her hair in a neat chignon, gathered her meticulously prepared documents, and walked to the waiting carriage. Dr. Berkeley met her at the Commission Chambers, a grand building near Westminster where government officials conducted their investigations into matters of public importance. Anna's face was pale but determined. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for 5 years," Clara replied. "Ever since the night I walked out of Blackthorn House with nothing but my dignity. This is just the formal recognition of what we've already proven." The chamber was imposing, high ceilings, dark wood paneling, a long table where 7 commissioners sat like judges. Clara recognized several faces. Lord Pemberton, a reform-minded politician who'd championed public health initiatives. Dr. William Ashford, a progressive physician who'd advocated for hospital modernization. And seated at the center, Dr. Cornelius Hartwick himself. Clara's steps didn't falter, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Of course Hartwick would be here. The man who'd tried to destroy her hospital, who'd called her unqualified and dangerous. He would never miss an opportunity to oppose her work. But beside Hartwick sat someone unexpected, Dr. James Morrison, the physician who'd declared Lord Ashford's daughter beyond saving before Elias had proven him wrong. His presence felt like a deliberate challenge. Lord Pemberton called the session to order. Miss Whitmore, Dr. Berkeley, thank you for appearing before this commission. We've been tasked by Her Majesty's government to investigate the state of hospital nursing in England and to recommend improvements. Your school has been identified as a potential model. We'd like to hear your presentation. Clara stepped forward, her prepared notes steady in her hands. She began by describing the state of nursing before their program. Untrained women, often elderly or infirm themselves, who provided minimal care and no medical knowledge. She detailed the mortality rates in hospitals where such attendants worked, the preventable deaths from infection and neglect. Then she presented the alternative: professionally trained nurses with comprehensive medical education, working alongside physicians to provide evidence-based care. Our curriculum requires 2 years of intensive study, Clara explained. Students learn anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and surgical procedures. They study disease processes, hygiene protocols, and patient care. Upon graduation, they're equipped to recognize symptoms, administer treatments under physician supervision, and prevent the infections that kill half of all hospital patients. She presented statistics that were irrefutable. Hospitals employing their graduates showed 30% lower mortality rates. Surgical patients recovered faster with fewer complications. Childbirth mortality dropped dramatically when trained nurses attended deliveries. These are not opinions or theories, Clara stated firmly. These are measurable outcomes, lives saved, suffering prevented. The difference between modern medicine and medieval superstition. Dr. Morrison interrupted, his voice skeptical. Miss Whitmore, these numbers seem remarkably favorable. How can we trust data compiled by someone with a vested interest in promoting their own institution? Clara met his gaze steadily. The data wasn't compiled by me, Dr. Morrison. It was compiled by the hospitals themselves. I can provide you with reports from 15 different London hospitals, all documenting the same pattern. When they employ our graduates, patient outcomes improve. That's not bias. That's evidence. Evidence gathered from hospitals in poor neighborhoods, Morrison pressed. Surely such facilities have lower standards to begin with. The improvement might simply reflect adequate care replacing grossly negligent care. Then let's examine hospitals in wealthy neighborhoods, Clara replied smoothly. She pulled another sheaf of papers from her documents. St. Thomas's Hospital began employing our graduates last year. Their mortality rate decreased by 25%. Guy's Hospital saw similar improvements. These are among London's most prestigious medical facilities, serving both wealthy and poor patients. The improvement is consistent regardless of patient class. Hartwick leaned forward, his expression cold. Miss Whitmore, you speak of medical education, yet you yourself possess no medical degree. You're not a physician. By what authority do you presume to train others in medical matters? The question was designed to undermine her credibility, to reduce her to the unqualified woman he'd always claimed she was. Clara had been waiting for this moment. Dr. Hartwick, you're correct that I'm not a physician. I've never claimed to be. But I am a medical scholar who has spent 5 years translating research from French, German, Italian, and classical Greek sources. I have read more medical literature than most practicing physicians in England. I understand disease processes, surgical techniques, and pharmacological interventions at a level that comes from deep study rather than rote memorization. She stepped closer to the commission table, her voice gaining strength. More importantly, I have something many physicians lack. I understand that medical knowledge doesn't belong exclusively to those wealthy enough to afford university education, that women are as capable of learning anatomy as men, that the working poor deserve the same quality care as the aristocracy. These aren't medical opinions, Dr. Hartwick. They're moral truths, and they're truths your profession has resisted for centuries. You speak of morality, Hartwick replied, his voice dripping with disdain. Yet your own moral character is hardly above reproach. This commission should know that Miss Whitmore was publicly rejected by the Duke of Blackthorn after attempting to entrap him into marriage. She's a woman of questionable morals, presuming to lecture us on medical standards. The chamber fell silent. Clara felt the familiar shame trying to rise in her throat. the old wound reopening. But then she looked at Dr. Berkeley, standing beside her with fierce loyalty in her eyes. She thought of Sarah and Margaret and Ruth, who'd become skilled professionals against all odds. She thought of the hundreds of students she'd taught, the thousands of patients who'd received better care because of her work. And she realized something profound. Hartwick's words had no power over her anymore. Dr. Hartwick is correct, Clara said calmly. 5 years ago, I was engaged to the Duke of Blackthorn. The engagement ended publicly and painfully. I was humiliated, ruined, cast out from respectable society. Every word of the scandal you've heard is true. She paused, letting them absorb this admission. But here's what the scandal doesn't tell you. After being rejected, I could have disappeared into obscurity. I could have accepted society's verdict that I was worthless. Instead, I chose to build something meaningful. I worked in a hospital serving London's poorest residents. I translated medical research that saved lives. I created an educational program that has trained hundreds of nurses and improved patient outcomes across England. Clara turned to face Hartwick directly. So yes, my moral character was questioned because I dared to reach above my station, because I was poor and female and ambitious. But the question before this commission isn't whether I'm respectable by society's arbitrary standards. The question is whether the work I've done has value, and the evidence, the lives saved, the statistics, the testimonials from physicians and patients, that evidence speaks for itself. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. Miss Whitmore raises a valid point. We're here to evaluate nursing education, not to adjudicate personal scandals. Dr. Hartwick, unless you have medical objections to present, I suggest we focus on the evidence. Hartwick's face reddened, but he said nothing. Dr. Ashford spoke up, his voice thoughtful. I'd like to hear from Dr. Berkeley. You're a qualified physician who chose to work with Miss Whitmore's program. Why? Anna stepped forward. Because I recognized that Clara, Miss Whitmore, had created something revolutionary. As a woman physician, I've faced constant discrimination from the medical establishment. I've been told I'm unsuited for medicine, that my presence lowers professional standards. Yet, I've saved lives that male physicians declared hopeless. I've performed surgeries with better outcomes than my male colleagues. She gestured to Clara. Miss Whitmore understood something most physicians refuse to acknowledge, that competence isn't determined by gender or social class, but by knowledge and skill. Her nursing program proves that when women receive proper medical education, they excel. Our graduates perform at levels equal to or exceeding many physicians. That's not opinion, that's documented fact. But nurses aren't physicians, Dr. Morrison interjected. They work under physician supervision. Surely you're not suggesting they're equivalent. I'm suggesting they're essential, Anna replied. A brilliant surgeon means nothing if postoperative care is inadequate. A correct diagnosis means nothing if treatment isn't properly administered. Nurses are the backbone of medical care, and they deserve recognition and professional training commensurate with their importance. The questioning continued for another 2 hours. The commissioners examined every aspect of the nursing program: curriculum, clinical training, certification standards, employment outcomes. They interviewed graduates who'd been invited to testify, hearing firsthand accounts of their education and work. Mary stood before them, no longer a seamstress's daughter, but a confident professional, and described assisting in a complex surgical procedure that saved a child's life. The physician trusted my knowledge of anatomy, she said. He asked my opinion on technique. I wasn't just handing him instruments. I was a partner in saving that child. That's what proper training creates. Another graduate described preventing a patient's death by recognizing early symptoms of sepsis that the attending physician had missed. I documented the fever progression, the increased heart rate, the confusion. I presented my observations to the doctor with citations from medical literature Miss Clara had taught us. He took my concerns seriously and acted immediately. The patient survived. These testimonies were powerful, undeniable. The commissioners listened with evident interest, their skepticism gradually shifting to something like respect. Finally, Lord Pemberton called for a recess. The commission will deliberate and reconvene in 1 hour with our preliminary findings. Clara and Anna waited in an antechamber, too nervous to speak. Dr. Berkeley paced while Clara sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to hope too much. Elias arrived during the recess, having closed the hospital early to be there. How did it go? We presented the truth, Clara said quietly. Now we wait to see if they're brave enough to accept it. When they were called back into the chamber, Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought the commissioners must hear it. She walked to the front of the room with her spine straight and her head high, prepared for either vindication or defeat. Lord Pemberton stood, holding a document. Miss Whitmore, Dr. Berkeley, this commission has reviewed the evidence you presented along with testimonials from hospital administrators, physicians, and patients. We've examined your curriculum, your certification standards, and your employment outcomes. We've considered objections raised by Dr. Hartwick and Dr. Morrison regarding proper medical hierarchy and professional standards. He paused, and Clara held her breath. It is the preliminary finding of this commission that the Whitmore-Rowan School of Nursing and Midwifery represents a significant advancement in medical care. The evidence demonstrates conclusively that professionally trained nurses improve patient outcomes, reduce mortality, and enhance the overall quality of hospital care. We recommend that Her Majesty's government establish formal certification standards for nursing based on your program's model, and that all hospitals receiving public funding be required to employ only certified nurses within 5 years. Clara felt her knees weaken. Anna grabbed her arm, steadying her. Furthermore, Pemberton continued, we recommend that Miss Clara Whitmore be appointed to the National Board that will oversee nursing certification and standards. Her expertise and experience are invaluable to ensuring the program's success. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Hartwick's face was thunderous, but he was outvoted and outmaneuvered. The evidence had been too strong, the testimonials too compelling. Clara had won, not just for herself, but for every woman who'd been told she wasn't capable, wasn't worthy, wasn't enough. After the session ended, Clara was surrounded by well-wishers and reporters wanting statements. She answered their questions mechanically, still reeling from what had happened. Then she saw Adrian standing apart from the crowd, waiting. She excused herself and walked to him. They stood facing each other in the corridor outside the chamber, and for a moment neither spoke. Congratulations, Adrian said finally. You've changed England's medical system. That's extraordinary. Thank you. I heard the Commission's recommendation. They want you on the National Certification Board. Yes? Will you accept? Of course. It's the opportunity to influence nursing education across the entire country, to ensure that what we've built in Southwark becomes the standard everywhere. Adrian smiled slightly. You've come a long way from the governess I humiliated at the midsummer ball. I was never just a governess, Clara replied quietly. I was always capable of this. You simply couldn't see it. I know, and I'll regret that blindness for the rest of my life. He hesitated. Clara, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to say it one final time. I'm sorry. For the humiliation, for not seeing your worth, for nearly destroying something remarkable before it could fully develop. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Clara looked at him. This man who'd once held such power over her life and happiness, and she felt only a distant echo of old pain like a scar that had healed completely. I've forgiven you, she said, surprising herself. Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger was preventing me from fully embracing what I'd built. I'm not doing this for you, Adrian. I'm doing it for myself. Relief flooded his face. Flooded. Thank you. But understand this. I'm not the woman you rejected. I'm not even the woman who walked out of your house that night. I'm someone entirely different now, someone I built from the ashes of that humiliation. And this person? She doesn't need your approval or your regret. She knows her own worth. I can see that. Adrian's voice was soft. You're magnificent, Clara. I wish I'd been wise enough to see it when it mattered. If you had, I might never have become who I am now. Clara smiled slightly. Perhaps your cruelty was the greatest gift you could have given me. It destroyed everything false and forced me to build something true. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Then Adrian extended his hand. Friends? Clara considered, then shook his hand firmly. Cordial acquaintances who share an interest in medical reform. That's the best I can offer. Then I'll take it gratefully. As Adrian left, Elias approached with Dr. Berkeley. We're going to celebrate, he announced. The entire hospital staff, all the students, everyone who made this possible. You have to come, Clara. This is your victory. It's our victory, Clara corrected. None of this would exist without you, Elias. Without Anna, without Sarah and Margaret and Ruth, without every student who believed in what we were building. Then let's celebrate together, Anna said firmly, because this isn't just about a royal commission or national recognition. It's about proving that women belong in medicine, that the poor deserve quality care, that tradition isn't sacred if it's killing people. We've changed the world, Clara. We should acknowledge that. The celebration that night was held in the hospital's main ward, transformed with candles and flowers donated by grateful patients. Former patients came, bringing food and drink. Graduates traveled from across London to attend. The three original nurses, Sarah, Margaret, and Ruth, stood together, wearing their crisp uniforms with pride. Thomas arrived with Mrs. Helena Blackthorne, who presented Clara with an additional endowment for the nursing school. "I told you I was wrong about you," Helena said quietly. "Today's commission hearing proved just how wrong. You've accomplished something far greater than becoming a duchess. You've become a pioneer." Thomas hugged Clara tightly. "I always knew you were extraordinary, Miss Clara, even when Uncle Adrian was being stupid." Clara laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Thank you, sweetheart. Your faith meant everything." As the evening progressed, Clara found herself standing with Elias, watching the celebration swirl around them. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" Elias asked quietly. "If the Duke hadn't rejected you, if you'd become a duchess instead of building all this?" Clara considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but I don't regret how things unfolded. Being rejected, being humiliated, losing everything I thought I wanted, it freed me to discover what I actually needed: purpose, meaning, the ability to change lives through work that matters." "You've changed my life too," Elias said, and there was something in his voice that made Clara turn to look at him fully. "Elias, I know you've told me you don't want marriage, don't need a husband, that your work is enough, and I respect that completely." He met her eyes steadily. "But I also want you to know that working beside you these past 5 years has been the greatest privilege of my life. You're brilliant and fierce and uncompromising in the best possible way. If you ever change your mind about sharing your life with someone, I'd be honored to be considered." Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. Not the desperate need she'd once felt to secure her future through marriage, but genuine affection for this man who'd stood beside her through every battle. "Elias, I care for you deeply, but I don't know if I can be what you deserve. Your work comes first, I know that. I'm not asking you to change or compromise. I'm simply saying that if there's ever room in your extraordinary life for partnership, I'm here." Clara took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Can we see what develops naturally, without pressure or expectations?" "That's all I'm asking." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their students and colleagues celebrate. And Clara felt something she'd never expected to feel again after the midsummer ball: contentment. Not because a man wanted her, but because she'd built a life so full and meaningful that adding another person to it would be enhancement rather than necessity. 6 months later, the National Nursing Certification Standards were officially established, based almost entirely on Clara's curriculum. Hospitals across England began requiring trained nurses, and nursing schools modeled on the Whitmore Rowan program opened in Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, and Dublin. Clara traveled to these new schools, consulting on curriculum development, training instructors, ensuring quality standards. She became a national figure, not as a scandal or a social curiosity, but as a respected authority on medical education. Her personal life developed quietly alongside her professional success. She and Elias grew closer, their partnership deepening from professional collaboration into genuine emotional intimacy. They married in a small ceremony 18 months after the Royal Commission hearing, surrounded by hospital staff and students who'd become family. Clara kept her name, Clara Whitmore, not Mrs. Rowan. The school remained the Whitmore Rowan School, marking their equal partnership in all things. Their marriage was unconventional by society's standards. Clara continued running the nursing school and serving on the National Certification Board. Elias continued managing the hospital. They worked side by side, challenged each other intellectually, and built a life based on mutual respect and shared purpose. When Clara became pregnant, she didn't stop working. She taught classes until the week before her daughter was born, then returned to the school 3 weeks later with the baby in a basket beside her desk. Her students helped care for the child, and Clara taught them that women didn't have to choose between motherhood and professional achievement. This is the future, she told them, nursing her daughter while reviewing curriculum updates. Women who can be mothers and professionals, who don't have to sacrifice one identity for another. You're creating that future every time you refuse to accept limitations. The years passed. The nursing school expanded to a second building, then a third. They began accepting international students, spreading their methods across Europe and even to America. Former students became instructors, carrying forward Clara's vision of medical education based on evidence and compassion rather than tradition and hierarchy. On the 10th anniversary of the Royal Commission hearing, Clara stood before an audience of 500 nurses, graduates of her program and sister programs across England, at a national nursing conference. She was 40 now, her dark hair showing first threads of silver, her face marked by a decade of hard work and purpose. 10 years ago, she began, this profession didn't exist. Nurses were untrained attendants with no medical knowledge and little respect. Today, we are professionals whose expertise saves lives daily. We've proven that women can master medical science. We've demonstrated that proper training improves patient outcomes. We've changed how medicine is practiced in England. The audience applauded, but Clara raised her hand for silence. But we're not finished. Women still cannot attend medical school in England. Female physicians are rare exceptions rather than accepted professionals. We still face discrimination and dismissal from male colleagues who view us as subordinate. So our work continues. We train the next generation to be even more excellent than we are. We document our successes, publish our findings, make our value undeniable. We keep pushing until the barriers fall completely. A young nurse in the front row raised her hand. Miss Whitmore, do you think we'll see women physicians become common in our lifetime? Clara thought of her daughter, now 8 years old and already showing fierce intelligence and curiosity about medicine. She thought of the students she taught, brilliant and determined and unwilling to accept limitations. Yes, she said firmly, I believe we will. Because change happens through persistent, excellent work. Because we're proving every day that women belong in medicine. Because we're teaching our daughters and students that they can achieve anything if they refuse to accept society's verdict on their capabilities. After the conference, Clara walked through London's streets, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She passed Grosvenor Square, where Blackthorn House still stood, a monument to the life she might have led if Adrian hadn't rejected her. She felt no regret. That rejection had set her free to become someone far more important than a duchess. It had destroyed her false dreams and forced her to discover her true purpose. A carriage stopped beside her, and Adrian stepped out. They saw each other occasionally now at social events related to medical reform, cordial acquaintances as she'd promised, united by shared interest in improving public health. Clara, he said warmly, I heard your speech at the nursing conference was inspiring. Thank you. How are you, Adrian? Well, busy with parliamentary work. I've been advocating for expanded hospital funding. He hesitated. I heard congratulations are in order. Your nursing program was selected as the model for reforms in France and Prussia. The ideas belong to everyone now, Claire replied. That's how knowledge should work, shared freely, built upon, improved by each generation. Adrian smiled. Spoken like a true educator. I also heard that your daughter wants to be a physician. She does. And she will be if I have anything to say about it. I don't doubt that for a moment. Adrian's expression turned serious. Clara, I know I've said this before, but I need you to understand. Rejecting you was the greatest mistake of my life. Not because of what you've achieved, but because I failed to see the extraordinary person standing in front of me. I let social prejudice and fear of scandal blind me to genuine worth. Clara looked at him with something approaching fondness. The anger that had once burned so hot had transformed into understanding. They'd both been trapped by society's expectations, him by his need to maintain aristocratic standards, her by her poverty and limited options. We were both doing our best with the limitations we'd been given, Clara said gently. You're not a villain, Adrian. You're just a man who made a mistake. And that mistake freed me to become who I was meant to be. So perhaps, in a strange way, I should thank you. I don't deserve your grace. Maybe not, but I'm giving it to you anyway, because holding on to resentment serves no one. Clara extended her hand. Friends? Adrian shook it, his grip warm and firm. Friends. As Clara walked away, she felt the last threads of her old pain finally dissolve. She'd spent 10 years proving that she was more than adequate, more than suitable, more than the rejected governess society had dismissed. She'd become a pioneer who'd changed medicine in England, an educator who'd trained thousands of nurses, a woman who'd built her own life on her own terms, refusing to accept limitations imposed by gender, class, or scandal. She arrived home to find Elias helping their daughter with anatomy studies while their 2-year-old son played with wooden blocks on the floor. Their modest house was filled with books and medical journals, children's laughter, and serious discussions about patient care. How was the conference? Elias asked. Inspiring. The nurses are doing extraordinary work across the country. Our program is truly changing how medicine is practiced. Their daughter looked up from her anatomy textbook. Mama, when I become a physician, will I work at the hospital with you and Papa? If you wish, Claire replied, kneeling to kiss her daughter's forehead. Or you might do something entirely different. The important thing is that you'll have choices I never had. Because you fought for them, her daughter said seriously. Because many people fought for them, Clara corrected. Dr. Berkeley, Sarah, and Margaret and Ruth, the students who proved their excellence, the physicians who were brave enough to recognize our value. Change never comes from one person alone. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara and Elias sat together in their small study, reviewing plans for the nursing school's expansion. Do you ever regret it? Elias asked. The path you chose? The hardships you endured? Clara thought about the question carefully. She remembered the humiliation of the midsummer ball, the desperate poverty after being cast out, the years of fighting for recognition and respect. She remembered the loneliness, the exhaustion, the constant battle against prejudice. But she also remembered the first patient whose life they'd saved, the first student who'd grasped complex anatomy, the moment the Royal Commission had validated their work. She thought of the hundreds of nurses now working across England, the thousands of patients receiving better care because of what she'd built. No, Clara said firmly. Every hardship led me here. Every setback taught me something essential. I wouldn't change any of it, because changing it would mean changing who I became. Elias took her hand. You're extraordinary, Clara Whitmore. I'm just someone who refused to accept society's verdict on my worth, Clara replied. That's not extraordinary. That's survival. And given the opportunity, any woman would do the same. But you created the opportunity for yourself and for thousands of others. Clara smiled. Then perhaps that's enough. Perhaps creating opportunities is the greatest legacy anyone can leave. Years later, when Clara was in her 60s, the University of London announced it would begin admitting women to its medical school. Her daughter was among the first class of female medical students, trained by the best education available, supported by a mother who'd fought to make such opportunities possible. Clara attended the opening ceremony, watching young women file into lecture halls that had been closed to them for centuries. Dr. Anna Berkeley stood beside her, tears streaming down her face. We did it, Anna whispered. We actually did it. Not just us, Claire replied. Every nurse we trained, every student who proved their capability, every patient who trusted us when society said we weren't worthy of trust. We all did this together. The dean of the medical school approached them. Miss Whitmore, Dr. Berkeley, we'd be honored if you'd address the students. You've paved the way for this moment. Clara stood before the assembled students, 50 young women eager to become physicians, backed by decades of nursing excellence that had proven women's capability beyond all doubt. You stand here today, Clara began, because thousands of women refused to accept the limitations society imposed on us, because nurses proved they could master medical knowledge, because patients demanded quality care regardless of their provider's gender, because brave physicians like Dr. Berkeley showed that women could excel in medicine. She paused, looking at each young face filled with hope and determination. Your path will not be easy. You'll face professors who don't believe in you, colleagues who resent your presence, patients who doubt your competence. But you have something previous generations didn't. You have proof that women belong in medicine. You have evidence of our capability. Use that evidence. Build on it. Be so excellent that denial becomes impossible. The students applauded, and Clara felt the weight of history in that moment. She'd come so far from the terrified governess standing in a ballroom waiting to be rejected. She'd built something that would outlive her, a legacy of education, opportunity, and proof that women's worth was not determined by men's opinions. After the ceremony, Clara's daughter, now Dr. Catherine Rowan, embraced her mother fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything you sacrificed so I could stand here." "I didn't sacrifice," Clara replied. "I chose, and every choice led me to a life richer than I ever imagined." Walking home through London's streets, Clara reflected on the strange architecture of fate. If Adrian hadn't rejected her, she would have become a duchess, wealthy, titled, respectable, and ultimately unfulfilled. She would have been trapped in a gilded cage, her brilliance wasted on managing household staff and attending social functions. His cruelty had set her free. His rejection had forced her to discover her own strength. And in discovering that strength, she'd changed thousands of lives. That evening, Clara sat in her study, surrounded by letters from former students working across England and Europe. She read their stories of lives saved, techniques improved, boundaries pushed. Each letter was evidence that the work continued, that the revolution she'd sparked was spreading far beyond anything she could personally accomplish. Elias found her there, smiling at a particularly touching letter from a nurse working in rural Wales. "Happy?" he asked. "Profoundly so." Clara set down the letter and took his hand. "Do you know what the most remarkable thing is? I spent my youth dreaming of security, of respectability, of being chosen by someone important. And now, having achieved far more than I ever imagined, I realize those dreams were so small. What I have now, purpose, meaningful work, the knowledge that I've changed the world, this is worth 1,000 titled marriages." "You've certainly proven the Duke wrong about adequacy." Clara laughed. "I didn't prove him wrong. I proved that his assessment was irrelevant. His opinion of me, or anyone's opinion of me, matters far less than what I've actually accomplished. That's the real lesson. We waste so much time seeking validation from people who don't deserve to judge us, when we should be building lives that make their validation unnecessary." Later that night, as Clara prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was 63 years old, silver-haired, with lines etched by decades of hard work and fierce determination. She was nothing like the young governess who'd once stood in this city dreaming of escape from poverty through marriage. This woman had escaped through knowledge and courage instead. She'd built schools and changed systems and proven that a woman's worth had nothing to do with her desirability to men. Clara smiled at her reflection, satisfied. She had become exactly who she was meant to be. Not adequate, not suitable, not a duchess. Something far better, herself, fully realized, living a life of purpose and meaning that would echo through generations. And that, Clara thought as she extinguished the lamp, was the greatest victory of all. Outside her window, London slept. In hospitals across the city, nurses trained by her program cared for patients with skill and compassion. In schools throughout England, young women studied medicine because Clara had proven it possible. In homes both wealthy and poor, daughters dreamed of futures not limited by their gender, inspired by a woman who'd refused to accept society's restrictions. The Duke of Blackthorn had rejected Clara Whitmore as inadequate. But Clara Whitmore had rejected the world's verdict on her worth. And in doing so, she'd changed that world forever.